We have a guest.
Like to call this meeting to order. So,
Yeah.
Can I call for an adoption of the agenda?
Thank you.
All those in favor of adopting the agenda?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Harold.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember to look at the screen. And then we had our last meeting on the 16th of January. It was the introduction of the new advisory committee members, as well as the 9522 Lockside Drive at the Cedarwood site. Can I get a mover for the adoption of the minutes in that meeting?
I'll move that.
About that, did anybody have any clarifications or corrections to make for that? Doing none, can we vote on the adoption of the minutes from January 16th?
Can you record me as abstaining, Ruth? Please. Thank you.
That's right. Those in favor? Any opposed? Great. I guess now we get into the meat of the meeting. We've got the draft zoning bylaw, and Corey, did you want to start? Sure. And you're going to go through just the highlights, or are you going to go through section by section?
So yeah, the plan is to do a presentation fairly similar to what council received a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Might touch on a few different things with that presentation, but should take about 20 minutes. That's safe there, and then happy to take questions and get into discussion after.
Okay.
So I'll just share my screen here. So Harold can see what's happening. Are you getting that okay, Harold?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So for those of you, I think I've met most of you, at least briefly. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Corey Newcomb. I'm the Director of Community Planning town. And this is a presentation on a comprehensive update to the town zoning bylaw. Right now it's draft bylaw number 2275. And this is sort of the umbrella kind of overview look at what's in the bylaw and where we're going from here. So I just wanted to touch briefly on why we're doing this. As I think some of you know, the town undertook an update to its official community plan, started that process in 2020, finished in June of 2022. And quite often with a new OCP update in the community, a zoning bylaw follows on pretty shortly afterward. Council identified this within a few months of the OCP being updated and put it into their strategic plan. And staff began working on this in early 2023. So we had been into that process, working on this update for a few months, and we had started to hear that some provincial changes were coming to the legislation around housing and development as well. And didn't get any details on that until late fall of 2023 when the province adopted Bill 44, which I'll get into in a few minutes here. So really, it's a combination of the OCP update driving some zoning changes, and then the requirement from the province through Bill 44 to update the zoning bylaw as well. And the last comprehensive update to the bylaw was in 2012, so 12 years ago. So it's been a while. And this type of bylaw update can't happen often. It's a very extensive process, but it is a full review and update to every section in the bylaw. And just touching briefly on what a zoning bylaw is, I know APC is probably very familiar with it, but really it's a tool that municipalities use to regulate the use and development of land. So the use is, what's happening on the property, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential. And the density is how much is happening on the property. So size of the buildings, extent of use, things like that. And then it also regulates related things like landscaping, fencing, and it applies across the town. So every property in Sydney is affected by this bylaw. And just touching very briefly on the OCP policy context that we're working in with the zoning bylaw update. So the OCP is a document that sets broad land use categories. You see on the map here on the right, it divides the town out into different types of land uses. So residential, commercial, industrial. Very broad categories though, and really doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of what can be built on a property. So it's a bit of an umbrella document from that perspective. But the zoning must be consistent with the OCP. So when you see the zoning map in the next slide, there's a lot of overlap between those land use categories on this map from the OCP and on what we're proposing in the zoning. And the reason for that is because the Local Government Act requires that the two documents be consistent. And in the OCP update, some of the things we looked at that have fed into this process as well is looking to increase the amount of attainable and affordable housing in the town, looking at environmental preservation on properties, reviewing density and housing forum across all zones, implementing the West Side Local Area Plan, which is part of the OCP, looking forward at what to do about climate action and sea level rise, and also looking at keeping cities' business areas strong, so the industrial and marine industrial areas, and looking at the permitted uses and zoning in those areas as well. So here's the draft zoning map on this page, and just flicking back and forth between these two, you'll see that the areas between them, the colors differ a little bit, but generally the areas themselves are fairly similar. And so the reason for that is, of course, because the zoning and the OCP have to be consistent with one another. So residential areas need to be zoned as residential. Industrial areas in the OCP need to be zoned as industrial, and so on and so forth. But the zoning bylaw provides many more categories in terms of zones and more regulatory detail than the OCP would. So turning to the first part of this, which is the Bill 44 provincial changes that I mentioned that came out in the fall of 2023. So what that piece of legislation is requiring municipalities in British Columbia to do is to update their zoning bylaws by June 30th of this year. And in any zone where currently the only permitted uses are single family and duplexes, all municipalities must permit, all municipalities within an urban containment boundary, which is Sydney, must permit 3 or 4 units, depending on lot size, on those lots. There's no obligation to build those on behalf of the property owner, but we must, by zoning, permit up to 3 or 4 units on those lots. As part of that legislation as well, we must consider a provincial policy manual that they've put together, and the front page of that's on the right there, in developing the zones that we're going to be putting into the zoning bylaw. So that policy manual contains a lot of specifics in terms of what the province sees as being sort of acceptable guidelines for how those 3 or 4 units would fit on a lot. And so those are things we've taken into account when developing the parameters around these zones. And an important point too is that these have to be in the zoning bylaw pre-zoned. We can't sort of hold them back and wait for someone to come forward with an application. It has to be a by right situation. The town can still utilize the development permit process to kind of control how that development happens, but the development must happen by right as part of a zoning, as part of a zone in the zoning bylaw. So what does that look like for Sydney? in the draft zoning bylaw, we've developed a new section to replace what was previously called the detached residential zones. And that was the sort of single and two family section. And this section has been renamed to neighborhood residential zones just to be consistent with the OCP. We've replaced what was 8 zones with 6 new zones. We've simplified the uses in those zones so that it's much more straightforward. We've brought in a more flexible building envelope so that those 3 or 4 units can be built on lots where previously only 1 or 2 units were permitted. And the overall approach here has been to try to sort of bridge the gap between Sydney's existing neighborhoods and what the province is requiring us to allow. So the province has some pretty significant changes for consideration in that policy document that I mentioned in the previous slide. And I think what we've tried to do is pull back a little bit from that and try to bridge the gap between what the province is suggesting and what's in the existing neighborhoods, so that we have a bit more of a gentle transition into these new zones. So delving in a little more deeply, rather than single family or duplex or various sort of subcategories of dwelling units like that, what we have is just a single dwelling unit category. And the intent here is that that dwelling unit category is sort of a flexible catch-all. So you can take 3 or 4 units in a bunch of different configurations and fit them on the lots. So you might do 2 duplexes to get your 4 units. You might do sort of 4 townhouse units. On a 3-unit property, you might do a duplex and 1 small building out back. So there's the way that the zoning has been developed is that there's some flexibility there to allow a bunch of different dwelling types, but they're all just called dwelling unit. And so as long as you've got up to 4 dwelling units or 3 dwelling units, depending on lot size within that building envelope that the zoning provides, it's really flexible in how you can approach how those units get built. And the setbacks and the lot coverage, obviously we're talking about an increase in dwelling units here. Setbacks and lot coverage have increased in order to allow for this. So an example is on your typical R2 zone right now, front setback is 7.5 meters. That's going down to 4.5 meters. The province is recommending as low as 2 meters. So again, we're trying to bridge that gap between what the province is recommending and current neighborhoods. Sydney already allows 3 levels, so we call it a half story plus 2 stories above that. So 3 levels, but we call it 2.5 stories. In the new zones, we're proposing 3 stories. So pulling that half story out of the ground and having 3 levels above grade and adjusting the height to be commensurate with those 3 stories. We're limiting subdivision in many cases, especially on environmentally sensitive area lots. But also in other cases, we're keeping the minimum lot area at what it is in the current zoning bylaw, and that really doesn't allow for too many subdivision opportunities, except for on sort of bigger lots. And so really that limits the potential to split a lot where you might have 4 on the original lot and split a lot to 4 and 4 and get 8 units. There's not that many opportunities to do that. So that'll be a pretty limited set of circumstances under this zoning. And then a fairly significant change for properties abutting the natural boundary, which is a body of water essentially. So the ocean or Ray Creek, the setback has changed to 15 meters. Currently it's 7.5 meters, and that's in line with provincial recommendations as well.
Corey, can I ask one question?
Sure.
The 3-story building height, so will people be able to still build a basement and 3 stories above it?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that was sort of a quick overview of the provincial mandated changes from Bill 44.
Sorry, Corey, and if you don't mind, does being added to the provincial sort of housing targeted list change anything? Like when the other municipalities, when the last tranche of targeted housing starts, did they come with any additional zoning bylaw changes or recommendations from the province? Like, are we going to see any of that come from the province that could alter this?
I think in that regard, what the province is asking municipalities to do, and part of Bill 44 also speaks to this as well. Looking forward, the province is saying, we'd like you to plan for 20 years of housing supply. And we'd like you to pre-zone for that 20 years of housing supply. So that's not happening yet. They're requiring that by the end of 2025, I believe. So I think that's sort of related to the targets, in that they want us to look at what is our housing demand for a 20-year period. Are we zoning sufficiently for that? And, Bill 44 might help fill part of that need and demand for housing. But it's really, I think, still apart from Bill 44, it's still largely up to the municipalities how we deliver on that 20-year housing supply. So Bill 44 will go a long way to meeting those targets, but it may not be all of it. We don't know yet. We need to go through that process in the OCP and updating our housing needs report. And I'd love to keep answering
I
questions.
just have one quick question, just the pictures right there. So top corner, the row housing.
Yeah.
Row housing is defined in the thing as being on a fee simple lot. Fee simple lot isn't defined in the zoning but as far as like BC, it's full and irrevocable ownership of land owned outright with any limitations or restrictions under the local zoning ordinance. So once somebody builds a row house of 4, if that becomes a fee simple lot, it's sort of the gray area as to whether they can then put 2 suites in it and have 3 units on each fee simple lot.
Yeah, so you can't build row housing in the neighborhood residential zones. You'll notice if you look in the draft, it's a very specific use in the multi-unit residential zones.
Oh, okay, but it's not like R2 and
No,
So this picture here that I'm moving the mouse around, that wouldn't be considered row housing. That's 4 dwelling units that are all attached. It would kind of look like a 4-unit townhouse development. But
Yeah.
row housing as defined in the zoning bylaw is like little fee simple lots that are individual properties subdivided, and the houses all are built at 0 lot line, all touching each other, but that's in a different zone. That's not part of this neighborhood.
And the reason why
residential
you couldn't do those is because the minimum lot area for those row houses is it 150 square meters or something very
zone.
tiny.
Yeah,
And that's
155.
not permitted in these.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
When I was
so
looking
it's
in the
different.
code, it sounded like the only difference between a townhouse and a row house was row houses were
So
owned their land and townhouses were a strata.
that's true, but the code is a different set of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at this graphic here, this is supplied by the province.
Yeah.
And that upper right-hand example of the 4 townhouse units.
Yeah.
That could either be stratified townhouse units, or it could be all on a fee simple lot owned by a single owner. So they would be rental.
Rental,
You know,
yeah.
the owner might live in one of them.
It wouldn't become 4 lots.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay.
No, absolutely. And then again, going back to the intent of the way these zones have been structured and the single dwelling unit use, the idea here is that within that building envelope that the zones set out, you really have that flexibility and trying to take into account, many, many different situations. So you might have someone with a single family home, and they're looking for the ability to build another single family home on the lot for their kids who can't afford to buy a house in Victoria. They could do that. As long as their home isn't sited too far back on the lot, there would be that flexibility to build just another unit if they wanted to. They could build a duplex in the back for maybe their 2 kids and their families. The idea here is to really make it flexible within sort of the parameters that would help it to fit in with existing neighborhoods, but make it flexible enough that you would be able to fit different dwelling unit styles on these lots and adapt it to maybe circumstances where you've already got a building on the lot. Maybe you're knocking them all down and starting fresh, but maybe not. So the intent here is really flexibility.
So 3rd story on a BC box.
Yeah, I mean, and then all of this is within the parameters of the code too. So can a BC box accept a 3rd story? That's a building code question. Maybe it can. If it can, then that would be possible for sure.
Yeah.
But, a lot of,
With an engineering stamp.
yeah, maybe, like my house, for example, doesn't have footings.
Yeah.
So could you do a 3rd story on those? Might be tough.
Maybe we'll just allow for the.
Yeah, sorry.
Sure.
And then we'll after that.
So one last zone in the neighborhood residential zoning group is the R4 zone. It's only tangentially affected by Bill 44 in that it's exempt. So the R4 zone is created for Summergate Village. Bill 44 exempts manufactured home parks, basically. So zones that have manufactured home as the only permitted use are not affected by Bill 44, and so this zone would not be. And the intent here is just to replace the land use contract, which is the de facto current zoning for Summergate Village, with a similar type of zone. The land use contract expires on the same date that we're required to bring in new zoning for the rest of the community, so it's good timing overall. And I guess the one caveat is the lots that abut Ray Creek or Kelsit would be subject to that natural boundary setback as well. So 15 meters from the top of the bank of the river. So
Are the residents existing at 15 meters? Or if they were to burn down, would they be able to be replaced?
So it's a good question. Most of them are, because there's a significant buffer adjacent to the river through there, and there's part of it's park, and then there's a common property buffer as well. And if there is for whether it's Summergate or other lots within city as well, if there's a fire or something like that, the Local Government Act protects the reconstruction of that structure within its existing footprint for its repair. New development would have to comply with the setback, but if you've got that existing structure, it's grandfathered essentially at that old setback. So yeah, if there was a fire and
It used to be something where if it was 60% or beyond 60%, that you had to conform to the new criteria.
so if the use is non-conforming, which is not the case here, because the use of manufactured home or dwelling unit is permitted, but if the use is non-conforming and the structure burns down 70%, 75% above its foundations, then you have to rebuild under the new zoning. But that's a non-conforming use situation, not a non-conforming structure situation. Yeah, it's differentiated in the act. Okay, so moving on. That's all Bill 44 stuff there, except for Summergate, and that's all mandated by the province. I'm going to go through the rest of the zoning bylaw changes. These are largely driven by the OCP. Other considerations, just things planning staff have noticed over the years that could be improved or things like that. So this is sort of in the sequence of the bylaw, not completely, because the bylaw is a fairly complicated document, and I'm not covering the categories on the left here: the enactment, administration, definitions, establishments of zones. Those are sort of the regulatory bases. I'm just covering sort of the zones themselves and what they mean for property owners. So 4.1 is general use regulations, and this is regulations that apply to uses on properties across the entire community. So these apply to all zones. Not too many changes in this section. There's a new shipping container regulation. Right now, the zoning bylaw essentially bans shipping containers across the community. That hasn't worked especially well. So we're taking a more nuanced approach. Shipping containers would still not be permitted on residential properties unless there's a active building permit where storage is needed. Otherwise, we've allowed them to a certain extent on industrial, marine industrial, and commercial properties, Allison.
Not downtown commercial,
Not
but
downtown commercial.
Industrial and Harbor Road.
Industrial and Harbor Road.
Other properties where there's a valid and active building permit.
Yeah. Temporary construction offices, currently we permit one. There's been on some larger properties a demand for two, and it's been reasonable, so we've just added two. And then some minor changes to short-term rentals. You might be aware that the province has brought in some regulations around short-term rentals, and so we're making some minor changes to be more consistent with provincial regulation. But largely the town's approach to short-term rentals already is what the province has brought in. So there's not really many changes necessary there. Section 5.1, so that was about use, and this is more about density or building and structures. So 5.1 is specific to, again, across all zones, but specific to the structures on the lot. Again, it's pretty minor amendments here. We've reduced the size of rooftop access structures, the maximum size, fairly significantly, actually. So we're just looking to have stairs, an elevator, and a foyer in that top access structure. Anything in addition to that is not necessary, and so we've reduced the size to be more commensurate with what we're looking for there. And then we've revised the setback projection allowances, partially due to the Bill 44 changes, partially not. And things like stairs and ramps can project into the setback depending on how big the setback is. So in a 3-meter setback, you can project 1.5 meters. And the intent there is to allow things like a ramp that someone might need for disabled access to come into the setback rather than having to move the whole building back.
Some of those changes are also in response to policy guidance and direction in new design guidelines in the to allow those changes.
Okay, and moving into the multi-unit residential zoning group. So that is all the properties on this map in the various shades of pink. There's been changes to each of the zones in this group. What we heard a lot of during the OCP was that there wasn't a lot of open space for new development in these new multi-unit buildings. And what we've done in response to that is increase the setbacks and reduce the lot coverage so that there's more open space on these lots. We've modeled that out and it seems to work. To a certain extent, you never know until someone brings a development application in, but lot coverage has been reduced by 10% and setbacks have been increased slightly. We've added 2 new zones, which I'll get into in a minute. And most properties within these multi-unit residential zones are changing zones. So because the Bill 44 stuff is going from 2.5 to 3 stories, what we're doing is sort of bumping the other zones up as well. So the RM5 zone right now is 2.5 stories. Not all, but many of the RM5 properties we're proposing to go to RM6, which is also 3 stories. So again, being sort of similar in scale to the Bill 44 changes. And then most of the RM6 properties, which 3 stories, are going to RM7, which is 4 stories. So everything's sort of being bumped up in accordance with the changes in Bill 44. Some of the RM5 properties that are townhouse, and we want to keep them as townhouse because it's a less intensive use, like in environmentally sensitive areas, those are staying as townhouse. So one of the new zones is called RM6R, which is a rental only zone. It's only applied to 14 buildings on 13 properties in Sydney, and they're shown on the map here. They're all existing rental buildings built at various stages over the last several decades. And the intent here is really to try and protect these existing rental buildings that we have in the community. We've seen some of them redeveloped over the years. There's, I think, a lot of pressure to do so because a lot of them are at lower densities and there's a lot of development potential there. Quite often they house, I would say, the more vulnerable in the community, where people who are living there may not have many options because of the price point. And so it's really an attempt to try and keep some of this rental housing stock within the community. The second new zone is the RM7 West Side, or RM7WS zone. It's applied to a portion of the Galaran neighborhood that's consistent with and helps to implement the West Side Local Area Plan that was first adopted in 2018 and continues to be part of the official community plan. So the Galaran neighborhood is affected by Bill 44 because it's currently has single and 2-family zoning. So it's not possible to retain the current zoning in this neighborhood, and the West Side Local Area Plan has a bigger vision for that area. So what this zone proposes is in line with the West Side Local Area Plan policy, 4 stories, and up to 6 if there's an affordable housing component. The zone would be pre-zoned, so in place by right, with specific requirements around how the development would happen in terms of bonus density. Because of the road widths over there and some other things, we're looking for road dedication and park dedication. So those are requirements that are built into the zone. Even with pre-zoning, a council-approved development permit would still be required before development, and that would be focused on the form and character or the architectural style of the development. So projects like that would be coming to APC most likely. Typically, they're referred by council. And one of the benefits of this area is that it's close to employment, right next door in the industrial area, and there's good transit options. So it does make sense for a more higher intensity of use in this area. Moving on to commercial zones. No big changes in the commercial zones, particularly downtown commercial or the C1 zone. One of the things that did come up during the OCP was that the OCP process was that people were concerned about building heights in the downtown, especially. Some of the 5- and 6-story development that was previously possible under the previous OCP, some people felt was just too big for Sydney, and so the OCP process developed a new height map for the downtown, and this new draft zoning bylaw is consistent with that height map. And so generally it's 4 stories off Beacon Avenue, and then for properties fronting Beacon Avenue, it's 3 stories. And you see those other little red dots around the map there. Those are the neighborhood commercial zones. A little bit tough to see, but we've got several of them around town.
One at my Harvard statement. Wow, Kenora.
And the 2 of those zones have been renamed to NC1 and NC2. They previously had C1, C2 and C2.1. And we've made some minor adjustments, but generally the gist of those zones is the same as they currently are in the existing zoning bylaw. We've proposed some limitations on surface parking downtown for new development. So lots of 1,000 square meters or greater, that's about 11,000 square feet or greater, wouldn't be able to do surface parking. And that's really an urban design objective where surface parking tends to create blank walls on these downtown commercial buildings. So trying to limit those sort of blank walls in what is intended to be a very pedestrian friendly, interesting environment at street level. And then we've increased some of the setbacks where commercial property abuts a residential area, just to give a little more separation. Industrial zones. So the current M1 industrial zone, which is the dark gray area on this map, is being retained. And not too many changes there. It's sort of Sydney's core industrial area, and very much trying to keep it that way and keep industrial uses as the focus there. Next door, in the Gallaran neighborhood, the West Side Local Area Plan has proposed a mixed-use village there where it would be an area of housing potential, but also trying to bring in some mixed-use developments where sort of industrial supportive commercial uses could be located. So, you know, maybe businesses like commercial printing that don't require sort of heavy industrial processes with them, that might be supportive of industrial properties next door in the M1 zone. So in order to help bring this idea from the West Side Local Area Plan in, we've developed 2 new zones, the M2 and the M3 zone. Again, in the Gallaran neighborhood, because it's single and 2-family zoning currently, it's not possible to keep it as that zoning. So we're proposing to replace the purple area there with the M2 zoning. The M3 zoning is in the bylaw, but it's not currently applied to any properties. So a property owner would need to come in and apply to council to change their zoning to M3 and achieve what's possible in the M3 zone. So M2 is, I'll get into it in a minute here, but it's a very modest scale. It does have the potential for some mixed use. And then the M3 zone, again, it's not in the current bylaw and would require council approval to put it into effect.
So it is not.
Sorry, the zone is in the bylaw, but it's not applied to
It's
any
not applied.
properties. Yeah.
It's available for somebody to
Yeah.
rezone to, to go through that rezoning process.
So in the M2 zone, existing single family and duplex uses can be retained. And you'll see this across multi-unit residential zones where there's existing single and 2-family uses. Those uses can be retained, but you can also do the other uses as well. So the new part of the M2 zone, the new development would be 2 stories. So an existing scale with the existing neighborhood, and also allow 2 dwelling units, and those dwelling units couldn't be located on the ground floor. They would need to be above commercial space. So commercial or light industrial uses. And the uses that have been proposed for the M2 zone are significantly pulled back from what the M1 zone allows. So trying to allow, I think, a more sensitive level of use, knowing that this is a residential area currently. And the zone would be in place, but a development permit would be required to be approved by council before development happens. The M3 zone, Again, it's a mixed-use zone with commercial light industrial uses, but also significantly more potential for housing in upper stories of buildings. So between 3 and 5 stories, with some bonus density provisions written into those the increases in stories and density as they go up. And as I said, a rezoning to this zone would be required. So there's council discretion there on where the rezoning would happen and the parameters under which it would happen. Typically, a development permit goes with the rezoning process. So the form and character of the building is also being considered in terms of the use and density of the building. Moving on to the marine zones, not too many changes here, just trying to strengthen again these areas as significant employment areas within the town. So one thing we are doing in 2 of the marine zones is to reduce the number of permitted dwelling units to try and ensure that the commercial and light industrial marine focus is more prevalent. So reducing on the waterfront properties, reducing the number of dwelling units permitted from 2 to 1, and then on the upland properties going from a density measure that's 38 units per hectare, so it depends on the lot size, how many units you can get on there, to a 5 unit per lot maximum. So significantly bringing that down and shifting the focus to that marine industrial use. We also looked at some measures to potentially protect the adjacent residential uses from the impact of marine industrial processes. There's some single family properties in very close proximity to some of these properties. And so, we don't want heavy industrial processes sort of happening next to someone's backyard. Focusing again on the marine focus for the properties and office uses only being used for marine focus, and some limited changes to density regulations in the zone as well. But more or less from a general built form scale perspective, there's not really any significant changes there. Parks and utility zones, not many changes here. We've added some conditions to restaurants. Beacon Wharf would be one example, the Pier Bistro, just to bring the noise regulations in line with other C1 zone properties for restaurants. And then we've added a conditional use to the park zone as well to allow the boat launch in Tallista Park to be used for commercial uses, which it has been for a long time. It's just never been in the bylaw.
Is there any provision for anything else to be done with the ferry dock area?
So there's no changes related to the ferry in here. I think that would be a very big separate process. I think for any land use change to happen there, probably not appropriate in the context of this project. If an applicant came forward or Washington State came forward with a separate, we'd like to do this with the property, that would have to go through a separate council process. And yeah, so separate from here and then some changes. Institutional zones, again, not too many changes here. We've changed a bit of the language to be less specific to churches and added food bank as a permitted use in the institutional zones. Quite a few churches run occasional food bank type of operations, so thought it suited that use. And then finally, the comprehensive development zones. So over the years, there's been just over 40 of these. In the previous zoning bylaw updates, some of them were consolidated with other CD zones. So there's 34 left in the current zoning bylaw, and we're proposing to remove 24 of those. Some of those zones only allow single and 2 family dwellings, which means that they're subject to those Bill 44 requirements and need to be rolled into other zones. So most of those 24 are going into either one of the neighborhood residential, the R zones, or the multi-unit residential, the RM zones. And then there's 10 left over, and those are sort of complex sites like the Shoal Center or other properties where it's really difficult to fit them into a nice little zoning group. So they'll just stay as CD zones. There's a mistake in the bylaw. We removed CD1 from the map and forgot to move it from the bylaw itself. So that's coming out in the next iteration. Section 6, so this is after the zoning group sections. on landscape design, not too many massive changes here. We've added some screening requirements for shipping containers where they abut residential properties, for heat pumps. We've added a lighting requirement for dwelling unit pathways, and we've added a specific tree planting area on properties where sufficient space to plant a good sized tree would be required. This requirement in particular definitely has some implications for buildings where you might have underground parking or underground utilities. And Sydney's lots are quite small, and so fitting things onto these lots is a real challenge, making everything work. So it'll be interesting to see how this one is received. Everybody wants trees, but properties need to be serviced as well, so it's a real fine balance. Section 7 is all about adaptable housing. Many of the multi-unit residential zones and the dwelling units in the commercial zones require 20% of all units in the building to be adaptable housing. The province is right now sort of going through a process to update the building code and other regulations with regard to adaptable housing, and we're sort of waiting to see how that pans out. So we're not proposing any changes right now. Adaptable housing is sort of a kind of a restricted area where the province kind of wants to take control so that the regulations are the same across all of BC. And so they've sort of said, look, this is coming, and your ability to zone for this stuff is going to be taken away. And we're sort of waiting for that to happen. So until then, we're just deciding, leave it as is, and we'll deal with that change when the province brings it in. So that's, Allison, you want to add something there?
Nope, just a note on the time.
Okay,
1:40.
last slide. So next steps, the timeline at the right, as you can see, we're in this community engagement period between April 26th and May 12th. So we've taken the bylaw to committee of the whole on the 15th. Council discussed it further on the 22nd, referred it out to APC and the community for engagement. We're in that process. We're intending to report back to council with the results on this engagement process on May 27th at the regular council meeting, potentially with some recommended changes to the document based on community feedback and APC feedback, and then hopefully proceed on to bylaw readings and get this bylaw adopted by the provincially required June 30th, 2024. So that's it for me. Happy to take questions.
So, man,
Yeah, why don't we go around the table,
starting with me.
and start off with,
Do you want to stop sharing your screen, or just feel it's still useful to have the presentation available on screen?
I think it would be useful.
Sure. Let me know if the next slide.
Yeah. I have 3 questions. So regarding the Bill 44, there is a 6-unit requirement in there for the certain circumstances with the bus stop, et cetera, et cetera. I know that we don't have those routes here in Sydney.
Yeah.
However, was there a consideration to include that in zoning in case that potentially happens?
Yeah, we briefly discussed that. The idea of, could we build that in so that when transit gets to that point, it would be ready to go. As things sort of became more clear around how this is all working, it became evident that there's a bit more of a structured process around those transit lines being designated as having that level of service. And so it looks like when transit gets to that point, the province will sort of go through a process to designate that and identify those lines, and then identify them to the municipality and say, okay, now you have these lines. Okay. And so I think we thought, better to wait until that happens, and a lot is changing right now too. So I think we just felt that A, there's enough on our plate with this stuff, and then B, who knows what can happen in the next.
Fair enough. No, I was wondering if it was, easier to plan for it, but it sounds like.
Yeah. And on that point as well, so the 6-unit areas that have that transit access, municipalities cannot require parking. I haven't talked a lot about parking here because it's in a separate bylaw in Sydney. But for the 6-unit projects in other municipalities, they can't require parking, but because we're not affected by that, we only have the 4-unit maximum. The existing parking requirements would apply. So that's one per
Yeah,
unit.
one per unit, yeah. My second question is regarding STR regulation. The current, I think currently is, you know, we have 2 units. One has to be either long-term occupied either by tenant or owner, and the second one can be STR. How does it change when you have 3 or 4 units?
So it doesn't change.
So it's still one per.
It depends on the tenure of the property. So like we talked about in this slide, in the top right there, if you have 4 townhouse units,
Yes.
if those 4 townhouse units are unstratified and a single owner owns them,
Yeah.
in order to short-term rental, 2 bedrooms, anywhere on the property, the owner needs to live on that property. In the case of a strata, if those 4 units are stratified,
You can't.
the owner would be each individual townhouse
Yeah.
unit owner. And so the owner would need to live in that townhouse
Yeah.
and could short-term rental 2 of the
Like,
bedrooms in that townhouse.
Yeah.
So if the owner doesn't want to live there,
You
he
can't.
can't short-term.
Yeah.
rental.
Yeah, but like, I mean, say it's not stratified. This is more of my question.
Yeah, so in a
So
non-stratified situation,
I own 4 townhomes. I live in one.
yeah,
I can
and
still do one.
well, what the bylaw says is you can short-term rental up to 2 bedrooms.
Okay.
So if you've got a 3-bedroom townhouse, it might be
Okay.
difficult.
Okay.
But if you've got a
Makes sense.
single family house with a suite in it and then 2 accessory dwelling units out back, and they're both 1 bedrooms,
Yeah,
then one of those accessory dwelling, and you live on the property.
Yeah.
One of those accessory dwelling units could be short-term rental,
it's still one though. Like it's
Yeah.
not changing. Okay.
not changing.
And in your CD zone slide,
Mhm.
I noticed that large lot on the west side of the highway is designated as CD. I just wanted you to kind of touch base on that and give a bit of a background on why.
Maybe I'll pass it off to
That
Allison.
one. Sure. Yeah, 2180 Beacon West, APC saw the development application for that one
Mhm.
quite a while ago.
Mhm.
Council gave first and second and third reading to the bylaw amendment for that property a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, April 22nd. So it's had those 3 readings, but it was already zoned a CD zone
It was-
that allowed a gas station, convenience store, and I think a drive-through restaurant or something. That was a zoning from a development application back in the early 2000s and in 2003 or so. So that CD zone is there from that, and because the development application is in process, it has not been rolled in to the R7WS. Council's already given readings to this bylaw. So the zone in the draft bylaw is the original CD zone, and if council approves the development application, then that would change to be the newly approved zone. Would be in there.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. Thanks. I think that's all for me for now.
Mine was one of the short-term rental questions, so he's not here. What's the reason we are not allowing shipping from making housing more affordable, which I think is a better term to be using than affordable housing, because there's no such thing as affordable housing. What's the reason we're not allowing shipping containers as dwellings? For example, as a garden suite in someone's backyard?
So somebody could use one as a building component, just like we use 2x4s and sheeting to make a house. Somebody could use a shipping container and convert it to be a dwelling unit. But just to put it down and leave it looking like a shipping container and
see.
put a door in it and call it done, that's not going to work.
Got it.
But you can build a home out of shipping containers that meets the BC building code and has all the right parts to it that meets code. That's
Yeah.
no longer just a shipping container. It's a
Got
home.
it.
It's a dwelling unit.
That answers the question.
What we've actually done is remove the definition of shipping container from the bylaw. And then it's a little bit more in terms of when does a shipping container become not a shipping container? So these 2 pictures on the screen here are both made out of shipping containers. The top, I would say that's a shipping container. The bottom is a house, but both made out of shipping containers. And so I think there's a level of staff discretion that has to come into play there, just because, you know, it's probably a question with 10,000 answers. When is a shipping container no longer a
We
shipping
don't have a
container?
design panel in Sydney either, so you can't really tell somebody how their shipping container is gonna look.
So if someone comes in with a what we didn't want is someone coming in with, an innovative house like this one on the bottom, made out of shipping containers, and then have to tell them, no, you can't do
Right.
that, when there's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's a perfectly
Yeah.
nice looking house
Agreed.
because it's not built out of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some nuance, I think, now in the bylaw that allows for that kind of thing to happen, but also it's pretty clear that, a shipping container, in that sense, big steel box type of thing is not permitted.
I think there's legal precedent now too in BC around that very question.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah, there's-
My last point is I agree with Lucinda's comment about pedestrian overhead at Beacon and the Highway. I think with inevitable density changes, and the reality is people are going to want to walk into the town of Sydney. They're not going to hang out in what's going to be the commercial areas of the Gallery neighborhood. I think it should be a safer method to be getting across the highway.
So there is in the strategic plan, the town's strategic plan, a reference to address that, to move forward with safe pedestrian passage between West Sydney and downtown commercial park. So agreed, it's definitely something that is on the eyes and minds of staff and council.
Missed that in comments. That's a good idea.
Maybe, sorry,
I'm
Andrew,
done.
are you finished?
Done.
Okay. Yeah, maybe before we move to Bernadine, since Harold is on the screen, I don't want to leave him out. Harold, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I don't have anything specific at this point, and I mainly wanted to be here to listen in. It's a late here in the day, and I just wanted to attend as long as I hold out and see what you guys are discussing.
Okay, thank you. Bernadine.
I wanted to ask about the M2, M3, M2 area. If I have a single family residence or duplex in that area, then can I build additions onto it still at this point? And can I build, for example, a secondary suite or a garden suite in the backyard? How does that work?
So you can build additions onto it, it's still a permitted use, and the zone still has setback permissions. So the answer to that question is yes. In terms of the additional dwelling unit, that's also possible in accordance with the parameters of the zone. So the other two dwelling units that are permitted by the zone, you'll recall, can't be located at the ground floor. So they need to be above commercial or industrial space. So in the sense that you want to add a garden suite to the backyard, no.
Oh,
You could add a garden suite above a shop, like above a
Right.
garage, or above commercial space on the ground floor, and then have it be an upstairs.
And you could lease out that shop as
The light
One of the-
industrial.
one of the uses in the zone.
Can
Or-
it
or you
be 3 stories or 2?
The M2 zone allows the height of
Just
2
2,
stories.
right.
yeah.
So there's
So
no,
that's a bit out of.
Well, it follows the guidance of the OCP, which is
Right.
looking for that mixed use, light industrial, commercial with some residential.
Yeah.
So the intent of the M2 zone is to start to get that happening while still allowing those single and 2 family homes that are there to stay or to be replaced. Somebody could take down their single family home where there was one existing and build a new one. Or as you said, as Corey said, they could add on to it because there are parameters in the M2 zone
So,
for height, setbacks, lot coverage for those uses.
so I could add on to my single family home, and that addition could be a secondary suite.
No, it's the same on a single family house on a property zone, say RM5, multifamily low density, like close to Beacon Avenue. There's a few of those, and it's the same situation. The house can stay. There's no problem with the house, but you can't add a secondary suite to it. The point is the reason that you can't is to further those policies in the OCP. Like, this is the direction that council and the community has supported this neighborhood to go. So to kind of entrench those single and 2 family uses by adding a suite doesn't get it further in the line of those policies.
investment in those types of things actually goes in the opposite direction. Right? It
Yeah.
cements that use, that other use, the older use on the property for the time frame of the new addition. So if you're building a suite or an accessory dwelling unit that might have a lifespan of 50 or 60 years, the likelihood of someone redeveloping that property along the lines of the OCP and the West Side Local Area Plan drop dramatically, because that investment needs to be paid off or it needs to be written down in order for that redevelopment to happen.
We're talking M2 specifically, right?
Yeah, so you could, I mean, you could still add dwelling units in the backyard, but as Corey said, it'd have to be above that commercial or industrial space.
And I think one important comment on the M2 zone and the M3 zone, I guess, is that the M2 zone is, I would say, not a particularly attractive zone if you're a developer. The case of the M2 zone being attractive might be, someone who has a small business and maybe wants to build a bit of commercial space and make that business happen on quite a small scale on your property. You could build a building like the one shown on the screen here, where it's a little more substantial, and you might see, someone with, I'm trying to think of a use in the M2 zone, not coming to mind at the moment, but if someone wants to build a purpose-built small 2-story building like that and run a business out of it at a fairly small scale, then that would be a possibility.
Like an upholstery shop.
Something like that, right? Well, that would be more manufacturing.
Right.
Well, not for like automotive upholstery and stuff. It's quiet.
Yeah, I know, Allison, do you want to give me a good use for the
No,
M2
Yeah.
zone?
I just wanted to know what was possible for people who are owners of
Right.
single-family
Or,
homes
yeah.
or two-family
If
homes.
someone wanted to do a small scale craft
Lab or research establishment,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of
Commercial.
work live zoning, I think, does help with housing affordability. It's much more affordable for somebody who's operating an upholstery shop to live up.
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I think overall the number of people wanting to do that kind of scenario are fairly few and far between.
It could be a cost issue though.
It could be a cost issue. So we're walking a fine line between
Yeah.
allowing that, keeping the existing neighborhood as a
Yeah.
permitted use as well, and we also want more housing.
Yeah.
So the M3 zone is also created to be, from a development standpoint, much more attractive than the M2 zone. And trying to facilitate redevelopment at a more efficient scale to create more housing and not have the M2 zone as as attractive because we do want that land use transition to happen from the perspective of the OCP and the West Side Local Area Plan.
And the intent, I think it's important to keep in mind the intent of that transfer to increase the space for more light industrial and more commercial uses coming into that neighborhood is to respond and do our part in terms of that regional shortage of industrial land and to create more opportunities for businesses to grow or for new businesses to locate in these small light industrial limited commercial spaces and start to foster that economic growth in this area and create those spaces to exist, because it is such limited land use in the whole CRD that if we can start to create more spaces here and get that transitioning happening over time, as well as create more dwelling units, there's that much more opportunity than if it was just kept as zoning for single and two family, up to 4 units per property. There's so much more potential for that growth in the M2 and M3 zones.
And the previous OCP for a decade or more had this whole area designated as industrial.
Oh, several decades.
Several decades, with the idea that people would buy a bunch of the single family properties and convert them to industrial in sequence. And I don't think we ever received a single inquiry, at least in my time in Sydney,
No.
probably not Allison's, about that happening. And I think, the idea behind creating some sort of industrial supportive land use there is still there. It's just not going to happen in that sort of like big all at once way. It's got to be more incremental. And I think this is an attempt to do that.
Okay. Short-term rental. I just wanted to check, and I don't really understand how this works. I did read some of the provincial legislation and I saw what you had to say as well.
Mhm.
How does it work? Or is it covered in any bylaw anywhere? People who go away in the winter, who rent out their house or their condo, is short-term rental now 3 months minimum? That's sort of what I've read. And I'm wondering whether there has to be anything more in our own bylaw regarding this? Like, I know that you're talking about business licensing for people who actually want to have a business that does this. But for people who are primarily residential, they might be away in the winter for 6 months or whatever. Are they restricted to one of these time periods? Do they need a business license? Do we need a little bit more information about that?
So this is an area where, again, recent provincial legislation has made things a bit murky.
Yep.
But the approach up until the provincial legislation has been, in Sydney anyway, if you occupy this dwelling unit as your permanent residence,
Yeah.
and there's evidence for that, whether it be you've claimed the homeowner grant or in our records you're shown as living at the same address that you own, and you go away as a snowbird for 4 months of the year, 5 months of the year, the approach we've taken is that you can do short-term rental.
And what do you mean by that?
That you can say you own a condo, you can rent that out on a nightly basis while you're away.
Still following the rules, no more than 2 bedrooms.
Right. And so the reason behind that is that the intent of these short-term regulations, by and large, is to ensure that available dwelling units are not taken off the long-term market, put on the short-term market. But somebody who's a snowbird and is only leaving for 4 months, that unit is never going to be available for the long-term rental market.
It's their permanent residence and they're just going away for a few
Right?
months.
Like no one's
I
ever going to move
understand
in there
that.
as like, this is my new home. They're
I
going to have to leave
certainly
again.
don't want people in my strata renting out their unit on a nightly basis
No,
for
okay, so
3 months or whatever. So is there something in here that says
there
it's
seems
1 month or it's 3 months or something?
there isn't. Because if it's your primary, and
Yeah.
just like any other bylaw, people abuse that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
where it'll get to a point where, okay, this is not your principal residence. You spend 10 and a half months in Italy every year and you're back here for a month or something, right?
But your
But
strata
how
bylaws probably prevent that. Yeah, the strata itself can.
So there's
create-
what I have definitely seen in town is that stratas seem very unsure about where their powers start and end. And so despite the fact that we regulate short-term rentals, a strata council can say no.
Superseded. Mhm.
And in fact, stratas are better positioned to regulate that because stratas have the direct ability to fine it, and you're living in the building, so you know what's happening. Whereas the municipality, it's very difficult for us to sort of send a bylaw officer in and see what's happening, and
Yeah.
we're not going to stake out at night or anything like that, right?
No?
No.
We don't have.
Let's
to
do
do
it too much overtime.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's our approach to date, and then I think with this provincial legislation that's coming, I think we're still looking at it, and there'll probably be some further tweaks when it goes back to council. Because the province has their own definition now of what a permanent resident is, that might not be consistent with what ours is, and we'd like to bring them into alignment.
It's a big part of our demographics. It's a good thing to consider.
Yeah.
And that'll have to work with the licensing regime that we're working on as well,
Right.
which will come in. We'll be bringing it to council.
Yeah,
later
it's
this
coming
year.
afterwards.
Can I quickly jump in there, Bernardine, on this topic, licensing? Province introducing licensing for STRs is something Sydney looking into as well?
Yeah, council has given us direction to bring back an amendment to implement licensing.
Okay. Sorry, Bernardine.
Yeah, no problem. And then I have some other comments, but I'll just mention this one quickly. With regard to the new neighborhood, the single family and 2-family, where we can now have up to 4 units. And I know we still have parking requirements for 4 units. I have some other things with regard to that, but I just want to mention that if we're going to have that much parking on these lots, which most people in Sydney will want, that maybe some of that is going to be needing to be permeable parking to take up rainwater and that kind of thing. So, but I'll leave the rest till we actually get to where we're going when we review the whole thing section.
So the existing parking bylaw, as you know, requires some permeability for the front yard. I think there's a real
For a
question
single family as well?
in all these areas that are
Okay.
that are currently
Okay.
single family.
Okay, good.
It's I guess, 20% of the front yard area when it comes down to it. I think there's a bigger question here, and we'd like to see how things sort of evolve of, you know, can you fit 4 units
Yeah.
and 4 parking spots
Yeah.
and still make this all work?
Yeah.
And, you know, it has to be saleable.
Yeah.
And financially viable. And if the answer to saleable and financially viable is no, it's not going to happen at all.
No.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how people try to make this work.
Yep.
And to what extent, you know, how parking's fit on, you know.
Yeah.
Because if you're building 4 units and you want 4 parking spaces and putting in a front yard, that's like, in some cases, that's your entire front yard, which isn't permitted.
That's not permitted by the parking bylaw.
If you're gonna go down the side of the property and
Yeah.
park in the backyard
Yeah.
or into the building, that's gonna take up a lot of
Yeah.
other space on the lot size.
Yeah, and we've had a development like that on Melview or whatever it was. It was 2 lots and 4 units, and basically the entire
Right.
backyard was parking.
Yeah.
So,
The townhouses up there, I remember
Yeah,
that one, that's
yeah.
the 2 buildings,
Yeah.
and each one has 4 townhouses,
Yeah,
so it's 8
and-
units and then 8 parking spaces in the
Behind,
backyard, and
yeah.
the driveway down the middle.
So the one thing that's good to note about permeability in
Mm.
Sydney is that Sydney is not permeable.
no,
It's a foot of topsoil on a clay layer.
yeah,
And the topsoil gets saturated and then it just runs along the clay layer. And unlike in Langford, where you've got a lot of gravelly soils where it seeps into an aquifer.
Yeah.
In Sydney, it just runs along the clay layer really slowly and then drains out into the ocean. So there's not really that sort of like, let's recharge the aquifer type of permeability in Sydney.
yeah,
And so what we do instead is that developments like the one you just mentioned will have an underground water retention system
Right.
where all that hard surfacing goes into basically a tank.
Yeah.
And then it lets it dribble out into the storm
Slowly.
drain system.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's not a natural system by any
Yeah,
means, but
thanks.
Further through that, we actually do have some areas that are permeable, but because everything else isn't, I've got one in my shop.
they just kind of
sand.
fill up.
It actually, water comes out of the ground instead,
Natural springs.
almost year round.
Mhm.
Quicksand.
And anyone who
Mm.
owns a lot in Sydney knows that
Yeah.
it gets pretty wet in the winters.
It's news to me. I'm just kidding. I have a lake in my
Yeah.
yard in the winter.
That's it. Mhm.
Okay. Have you done any tests on the setbacks and lot coverages and things and the heights on the 4-unit residential? What I'm comparing it to is City of Victoria brought out the missing middle housing policy. First year, no developer could actually meet those criteria. So then now they're having to rejig them all. And so are you confident that the new guidelines can actually meet the criteria in all of our series of zones?
So we did model a lot of the setbacks and lot coverage and make sure that what you could build within that is sort of a viable floor area. When you get to the extremes, very large lots or very small lots, it starts to get a little bit off the rails, especially on the small lots. But on a typical, say, 6,000 square foot lot, I would say, yes, we're pretty confident that you can do a decent 4-unit development as the province requires. But parking is a little bit of a question.
Mhm.
But from floor area perspective, about what you can fit into that building envelope, yeah. And I think the approach we've taken here with this draft bylaw is significantly more flexible than what Victoria did with missing middle. My understanding of that missing middle bylaw is that it attempted to really structure things into a very small set of possibilities for what could happen on the lot. And that's not the approach we've taken. The approach we've taken is, here's your box, vertical, horizontal box within the setbacks in the building envelope. There's some limited, within that box, there's some limitations. So the 3rd story can't be more than 70% of the floor area of the 2nd story to provide a little bit of a setback at that 3rd story level. But other than that, there's a lot of flexibility within that box. And so it's an attempt to really leave it to the designer to do a good project. The downside of that,
If you see the parking is going to be you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back, should there be a consideration for parking as being somehow managed as the basement level, something like that, or that if surface parking is going to create no open space on a lot and all hard surfaces and no landscaping, then that's going to prevent those types of facilities being built, right? And that's what the province is trying to overcome, that municipalities are setting up standards that are unattainable to actually meet the four unit minimum.
so one thing's for sure, in Sydney, definitely doing underground parking on less than 12,000 square feet is almost a non-starter. It just doesn't make any sense financially or geometrically. So I would say in 99% of cases with this small scale multi-unit housing, it's going to be surface parking. And then I think the question really is, if you're going to fit 4 units on the lot and parking, what are the sacrifices you're going to make to do that? And I think we're fairly confident. We know there's going to be sacrifices. There has to be, just because. So whether those sacrifices are council through a variance process is willing to accept an entire front yard of parking, or to get down the side of the lot and park in the rear or under the building, there's going to need to be a design choice to have a big side setback, and that'll provide more open space, but it's also going to, affect the viability of the 4 units and maybe the size of them. I think what we've done is bring forward a set of regulations that even with those sacrifices, you can do the 4 units. So it's big enough that that the building envelope is big enough that the sacrifices can be made and still be viable from a 4 unit perspective. But the sacrifices are things we're really not sure about. So if the sacrifice is unit size or unit layout, for example, the bedrooms are only upstairs, Sydney has a real demand for all 1-level living. And so are those going to be saleable units? The sacrifice on the developer's part might be you have to do 3-story units and the bedrooms are all upstairs, and all of a sudden you're in a different sale bracket in terms of income. You're not selling to wealthier seniors. You're selling to starter home folks who can only afford to pay 25% less. And, it sounds a bit crass, but that stuff's not our problem. We've provided, I think, a decent level of buildability, balanced off with things like these things have to fit into existing neighborhoods. And we can't have wall-to-wall buildings in existing neighborhoods, zero lot line to zero lot line. There has to be some temperance to it. And what we've tried to do is fit all those things together and still provide some level of viability. So that's, I think, what you're seeing there.
An example that could work, though, is the townhouses on Rest End. Single car garage is the basement and 2 stories of living.
Yeah.
Which seems
The new one.
Yeah, 4-7.
so I mean, you could essentially do 4 of those.
Like a half basement with a garage. There's
Correct.
also a 4-unit townhouse development on Malaview. It's a long, narrow property, and the driveway is on one side, and the 4 units are all in a row. They're all 2 stories, and they all have garages. There's lots of different layouts and ways to make it work.
Yeah.
But I think like the provincial guidance, the policy guidance document that they released to municipalities, doesn't mean it's public on their website. Anybody can see it. But in there was a lot of discussion about parking, and it was encouraging municipalities with higher parking requirements to reduce them to 1 space per unit, which is what we've always required in Sydney for quite a few years. So they weren't recommending no parking for the 4 units on a property. It was 1 per unit. That's what we already have in our bylaw.
But I think we saw in the provincial policy document, there's no easy answers here.
No.
There's no magic bullet for parking. It just geometrically, in relation to the lot sizes, unless you've got a very large lot, geometrically, it's going to be very tough. And I don't think there's any magic solution to that.
To Kim's point, it is it is also the objective to reduce bureaucracy as part of it. And if we're having to, I shouldn't say we, if developers, builders are having to go through variances to make adjustments for parking requirements, it defeats the whole purpose. We're not saving any time, we're just adding another layer of bureaucracy to being bureaucracy to death.
Well, and everything will go to council because of.
Correct. There's no time saving, that's a cost.
If there's variances, then, again, that's why we're looking for feedback on the bylaw. But the zoning bylaw is not the parking bylaw, so there's no changes proposed to the parking bylaw, right?
So, and I think there's a real difference between a developer doing a project that might be like what Allison mentioned, the 4 townhouse units in a row and trying to make all that work on a property that's maybe too small, and an existing homeowner who has, a single family home with a suite. Maybe they've got a side setback that's big enough for a car to get past, and you can do, they've got an existing garage at the front, and beside the driveway, they can do another little suite parking space. And then cars can get to the back, and you could do another second house at the back and have a little bit of parking back there. So there, I think there are situations where you can definitely make it all work. It's just, I think with, no offense intended, but with developers, they're looking to maximize what's happening on that property. And invariably, I think, you get to a point where there's this push-pull situation where, developers are trying to make things work, and the regulations are pushing back. And the reason for the regulations pushing back is because of the things I've mentioned about trying to fit things into neighborhoods and provide some level of open space, et cetera. And when you get into that situation of that push and pull, you need a mediator. And, unfortunately, that mediator ends up being council, because they're sort of the arbiter of that stuff. And, I think, we spent a lot of hours discussing this. I think we've gotten to the point where we feel comfortable with what these regulations are showing around the size and viability of development. And if someone wants to go beyond that, if they get adopted and someone wants to go beyond that, that's what the variance process is there for. And
yeah, we did a lot of modeling, a lot of GIS modeling in multiple different situations and property sizes and zones and all the different built form parameters you see in the draft bylaw: height, setbacks, lot coverage, different lot sizes. And thinking too, as Corey said, trying to find that balance between the provincial guidance, and they're saying, yes, please try to make this work. And they recommend numbers, but then thinking of our existing context and transitioning from our existing zoning regulations to the new. Like Corey gave the example of the 7.5 meter front setback, 25 feet. And the province is recommending 2 meters, which is like just over 6 feet. So going from here to here, it's like, where's the middle ground in this? Most houses are already at the 25 feet or greater because they're older homes. So it's a real mix of trying to get this into the community in a way that changes, but not too much.
And we're in the community engagement period, and we would love to hear from developers on, what they think is crazy about this, where the barriers are going to be. Well, I've already heard it. So.
We sent it out too. We sent out the draft zoning bylaw, the link to the project page, and the report to committee of the whole, the information on the project, to a lot of people that have been building in Sydney recently or that have active applications, and said, this is changing. We'd love to hear what you think, as you're part of our building community that's investing in town. Give us your comments. Hopefully we hear from some of those people through this process.
And we've seen some sort of draft plans around, what could be done. And it's a real range. And, when in some cases, when the developer's reaching for the sky in terms of, well, I want to get 4 2,000-foot units on one lot. Yeah, you're pushing up against those limits pretty hard, and you're going to need variances to do that. What we've tried to do is, okay, 4 units on a single family lot. What's a reasonable square footage that, someone could expect putting that much density on one lot? And I'm not sure it's 2,000 square feet.
Yeah.
It depends on the lot size to an extent.
Which is good, I think, because 2,000 square feet comes with a price tag, and we're trying to create housing that's more affordable. So the bigger unit, the less affordable the housing unit is. So
sure, but of course, there's waterfront lots, right, where The
But
price
that's
point's
not-
always gonna be high.
Yeah, that's not the affordable housing demographic.
No,
That's
for
a
sure.
completely different demographic.
But, I think what we were thinking is, if you can get 4 3-bedroom units on one lot and they're, a decent enough size that it's sort of a reasonable townhouse unit, I think that's that's what we were shooting for as our max. And then if you get to that and make it work, everything below that, which is, you've got the house and you want to add this in the backyard and that all sort of works. It's what is the upper limit and trying to determine that.
So the other thing that you mentioned was that you're trying to set the subdivision limits so that existing lots could not be subdivided and then turned into 8 units or something.
Yeah.
But other municipalities like Esquimalt and Victoria have these corner lot provisions where you can subdivide off your backyard. You can have a unit with each one with a coach house and or a garden suite or basement suite, secondary unit. And they're doing that on something like 2,500, 3,000 square feet footprint. Like, wouldn't that be an opportunity of increasing housing and reducing the cost of the land component on corner? You could sort of count that out on a little corner or laneway type housing, right? Vancouver's the same.
When you say subdivide,
Yeah.
do you mean actually like split the lot in half?
Yeah.
And create 2 fee simple owned lots?
Yeah.
Maybe I could speak to that one. So they're like in the zone currently in our existing zoning bylaw and in the proposed zoning bylaw, there is a zone. It's proposed to be called R3. I think it has a CD name right now. That was developed a few years ago because somebody proposed to CD 42. Right now it's called, proposed to subdivide a lot that was big enough to put a duplex on because they wanted to build 2 smaller homes instead of one big box of a duplex.
Mm-hmm.
So they went through the rezoning process. That was approved. There's one up at the corner of Albay and Eden, southwest corner of Albay and Eden, that was big enough for a duplex split into 2. It's 2 smaller homes. Also at the corner of Kenora and Breathitt Parkway, same zoning was done there. So that zone would allow somebody whose lot is 700 square meters or more, because it's got a minimum lot size of 300, to do that. But through the provisions in the Bill 44 changes, somebody could build the 2 separate buildings and stratify them and sell those units separately. It wouldn't be a fee simple land subdivision, but they could stratify and sell separately or rezone to the R3 if they're large enough and split that back piece off and front piece, whatever the subdivision layout would be. So there is a provision in here to do that. And then in the Orchard neighborhood, the lot size there, the minimum is small. So all of those properties could be subdivided into 2 or more.
So there's definitely that
So you've got that
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah, it's there for sure.
in the R3 zone that Allison just mentioned, because it's a different zone that's only applied right now to 4 properties.
Yeah.
Someone would have to go to council and say, here's what I
Go through
want to
the
do,
rezone.
get approval.
Right.
And that's the kind of idea, like, okay, you want to go on a smaller lot, show us what you want to do here. But you could also just keep that lot and do the 4 units as well, so.
And if somebody does that, rezones to the R3 or 350 and splits their lot, they could put 4 units on each one of those new lots
That's
because it's
sort of what
over
I'm thinking.
280.
Yeah.
So going through the rezoning process does create some design control on that, because most of these houses are not in development permit areas. There's no design control over what these look like in terms of the look of them, the form and character. Like if it was a 4-unit townhouse development, that's a development permit going through, like if it's in an RM zone, a designated development multi-unit residential DP area, that's going to council. It's probably going to get referred to APC for review. But somebody in like an R2 zone that's wanting to build 4 units, that will be a building permit. There's no design control over that. So having the rezoning, if they want to do the subdivision that you're thinking of, it does add that layer of design control through the rezoning process. You're like, what are these houses going to look like?
And this might be a very great option to get some of the, I would love to see 4 units on a 350 square meter lot. Is that going to be like 4 little 350 square feet studio units.
Well, if you,
And how
if
affordable
you
would that
apply
be?
the,
Like, that would
It'd be
be
very affordable.
meeting a
if
need.
you apply the lot coverage restrictions on it, yes, it will, but,
And the province isn't saying that every lot has to be, you know, a 2,000 square foot townhouse. All they've said is that you need to be able to get 4 units on one lot. And, you know, I would love to see the 3 units on anything below 280 square meters.
mhm.
Like,
Well,
it doesn't matter what type of units they are, but they're gonna be small.
Mhm.
That's just the way it is. And maybe that's, you know, we've got a real short, like with this rental zoning, a lot of the people in there just want a small studio unit that's affordable, and maybe that's the solution. Might take a while to get there, but
no,
Okay.
Are you,
I just have one other question about, like, we haven't, Sydney hasn't been allocated a target of housing to have within the next 5 years, but
it's happening.
it is.
we're on the.
it was
we're on
happening.
this.
It is.
All the municipalities in the CRD are identified as on the hot list.
So,
Staff
so
meeting.
have you done any projection that with this guideline of zoning, that this gives you sufficient land base and sort of zoning to accommodate, to make that happen within 5 years if the development community picks it up?
So the province has kind of done this a little bit backwards. What they've done is just say, I think almost as an emergency measure, get this zoning in place by June 30th. The next step that they've forced municipalities to undergo is update your housing needs assessment. And this time they don't want 5 years of housing demand forecast. They want 20 years of housing demand forecast. Then in 2025, they've said, update your OCP again to incorporate that 20 years of housing forecast. And then following that OCP update your zoning bylaw to pre-zone for 20 years of forecast housing demand.
So this is step one.
So this
of
is step
process.
one of
We're at step one.
4-step
Is our
process.
zoning bylaw.
And we're gonna have to take those housing targets into account. So there's like at least 3 years of work ahead of us to update all our documents to incorporate that 20-year housing demand forecast. And it'll start basically as soon as this process is done.
But you must already have some sort of housing needs analysis.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
And so-
2018, I think.
Is it will this meet that
Oh,
housing
yeah.
need?
Yeah, even without this, it would have met our housing. Sydney only grows at just under 1% a year. In one sense, the period we lost population. So, you know, I don't think there's any concern about that, but I think the province wants to see it explicitly stated and pre-zoned for us. So.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try to speed around this. Some of you don't need to respond to. So the shipping container law, currently Mobox's business model is if you're moving, they drop a shipping container, you load your stuff in, they pick it up and they drop it off at your new house. Under the new shipping container law, Mobox can't do business in Sydney.
They can't right now.
With,
But it's
so I
temporary
don't-
for a couple days. It's not a use happening on the property. If that
Yeah,
box
I
is
wasn't
coming and
sure how
going and
that-
it's just for a
That's just-
couple days,
That's part of people moving.
that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay.
The RM6R, which I love, would it not be pertinent to include something for the commercial buildings that are mostly rental, like above the cut or above Bell and Andre's barber shop there? That whole building is all purpose-built rental. But there's nothing that says that the owners of the building can't decide to sell those off as condos.
Yeah, I mean, that building couldn't be stratified easily right now anyway, so selling off as condos would be difficult. I think it's just we've tried to stay away from the mixed use buildings.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other purpose-built rental stuff that's been built recently is stratified already.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Section 4.4, permitted conditional uses in commercial zones, fuel 4.410 on page 49. Conditional uses, gas bar, fuel storage, all fuel must be stored underground. So either you need to amend that because propane can't be, and hydrogen filling stations hydrogen has to be stored in an above ground ASME standard steel pressure vessel. And they put like 14 hydrogen fueling stations in so far in BC. lasted like all the containment systems for them.
Yeah.
So those could be coming. So it's either outlaw hydrogen filling stations or propane, or amend that for.
Take a look at that.
That I already got a good answer for before. On the R2 subdivision with the minimum lot of 500, like I mentioned, it allows a lot of properties that are 10,000 square meters, which all seem to be right at the end of cul-de-sacs. You subdivide it in half, but if you bumped it to 600 square meters, that would solve that, and they'd be, and you could still, like, there are still big properties you can subdivide, like corner of Pleasant and Calvin. That's 15,000 square feet, and there's another one on Ardwell that's 20,000 square feet. So there are big lots that could still be subdivided.
So the draft zoning bylaw isn't proposing to reduce the minimum lot size of zones in most areas. The only place we're proposing to increase the minimum lot size is in those environmentally
in the
sensitive
waterfront
EP areas
Yeah,
to limit subdivision in those those ESAs.
where it's increased. by
So-
10 acres.
Yeah, Sydney allows panhandle subdivisions, like at the end of cul-de-sacs or places where you subdividing kind of the back off of the front.
Yeah.
Some municipalities don't, but Sydney always has. We found that it works with our overall street layout.
Fair enough.
Is the, yeah, and I guess the question is, I guess some might view it as a good thing that you can subdivide those properties and create more housing.
I guess when I actually came up with all that I actually didn't realize that you were still able to mandate parking. And I thought, there's no point in the cul-de-sac anyway, and if people are putting 8 units,
Yeah, on the
subdividing, putting 8 units, it would be,
Yeah.
it would become not very good quality of life.
Well, I think you've got also a minimum frontage on subdivision too, so you can't really get the minimum frontage.
Well, there's a-
on-
Yeah, that's a panhandle.
There's a minimum requirement for a building envelope shape. Like you have to be able to fit a 9 meter by 9 meter rectangle on a property, like outside of the required setback areas. That's to make a usable property, one that will actually function to build a house.
Mhm.
So you can't just create a lot that's 2 meters wide, just for the sake of having a property. It's got to work. So yeah, there's requirements in the subdivision bylaw for that.
On the setbacks, I have just a differing opinion than what you guys came up with. It pushes the backyards pretty close to each other as far as the houses, and if the houses are gonna be 40 feet tall, in R1, it actually puts those houses less than 20 feet apart at 40 feet tall. And in R2, it's like 29.5 feet apart from house to house with the setbacks that you've got. If you did, which I know parking in the front is an issue, but if you were to push them to the front, I don't think you would get any real difference in the change of how it is driving down the street. You drive down any street in Sydney and you see trees hanging out on the road. It's pretty shrouded. So the houses aren't going to feel too crowded to move forward, but that would bump it up on an R2, like at the maximum, to having 45 feet between the houses, which then if you're 40 feet tall, you've still got 45 feet between the houses. You then have 70 to 80% more daylight time, with an increase between the houses of over 50%.
Okay, so we're diving deep here.
Yeah.
But on a typical 600 square, 6,000 square foot lot,
Yeah.
so 5,500 square meters, sorry, 550 square meters.
Yeah.
As proposed in city R2 zone, you've got 2 meter side setbacks, 4.5 meters on front and back.
Yeah.
2 stories up, and then the third story would be 70% floor area of the story below. On top of that, you've got lot coverage limitations.
Yeah.
So that the building envelope created by those setbacks is actually closer to 50 or 55% lot coverage. So you have to pull in even further from those setbacks because of the lot coverage limitations.
Yeah.
And so you're moving a 45% lot coverage box inside those setback boxes. So you still could push everything to the back and go straight up.
Yeah.
And just tear down at the front of the lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I
No.
guess someone might do that.
I mean,
I
I'm
think
just,
it's,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
I'm just,
What we didn't want to get into is the Victoria situation. Where
Yeah.
we're dictating all these minute
Yeah.
little things, and then we end up with a situation where, okay, I've tried to comply and
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get there because, you create these regulations, well, we'll try to address this, and we'll try to address this, and we'll try to address this.
Yeah.
And you get
You
yourself
get
into this
so
box, and I think that's
Yeah.
what Victoria did.
I'm just thinking it leans towards pushing the properties more towards the front. The backyard is where people tend to have, people do stuff in their front yard. They do stuff in their backyard. And people with existing gardens, since most properties are north-south facing in Sydney, every single house that's built closer to the back will then, that entire street, it will shade that,
I don't disagree with that. I've also been through a process in Sydney where smaller setbacks have been proposed.
Yeah.
And were not met kindly.
Yeah.
I think people really have a sense of, those front setbacks being
Yeah.
the maker of the character of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create a balance between not destroying that neighborhood character totally that people sort of accept as Sydney's, single family neighborhoods, and also not go right to the back of the property, 1.5 meter setbacks for accessory buildings.
Yeah.
We're trying to just.
I know, I totally understand the plan behind it, but I think what people don't realize that are complaining about front setbacks is that they're going to be more affected by a shorter rear setback, in that their established gardens are going to be shaded more, not to mention from a fire prevention standpoint. When the houses are closer together at the back,
And then like
it's
the
a
back,
lot harder.
the front of has the boulevard.
Yeah, the front has a boulevard and a street, so if they're already really far apart in the front, when you start putting them close together in the back, you shade the backyards, it's harder to control fire, you get less sunlight. And
So the rear yard setback right now in the R2 zone is 5.5 meters, 18 feet. We're proposing to drop that by 1 meter.
yeah.
3 feet to 4.5 meters. So not much of a change really.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't agree that most properties are north-south facing when you look at how many corridors we have that go north-south, like Lochside, Maryland, Webster, Rest Haven, Kenora, and all the cul-de-sacs you mentioned too. There's houses facing every direction. And there's so many individual situations too, in terms of trees that people are trying to protect. Maybe their front yard has the solar exposure, and there's all these different parameters. And as Corey said, like the more things we're trying to design for in our regulations, the more tight we get in that box, and then it becomes so bureaucratic, as Andrew pointed out, that it's just impossible. So what we're trying to do is create this big shape in which people can put houses, and if they're 4 in 1 or they're 4 little houses, there's all kinds of design options that are in there. We just want to try to keep it open for people
Yeah,
to
my
respond
thought
to
was
their own site situation.
Same size box, just shifted forward versus shifted back.
And in this, they could shift it 3 meters closer to the front than they currently can, from 7.5 meters to 4.5 meters. So there's some space there, and someone could go for a variance. Again, that's the reason for the variance process, for those site-specific situations, to be like, wow, we have this big backyard you want to keep. Let's pull the whole thing to the front and show us how that works fine to meet those policy goals.
I think the other risk too, the provincial approach, which is that tiny front setback, they've got a lot of discussion in there about getting cars down the side and then using the backyards for parking. And that's way more impermeable surface. You've got to get a driveway right to the back of the property. Then you need maneuvering space at the back of the property. So you've got to basically pave the entire rear yard. And okay, so you've got less shading, but then you've got basically this big asphalt parking lot in the back, right? I don't think there's easy wins here. Regardless, it's trade-offs at every juncture.
I agree.
Right.
I agree. I mean, I think to make what the province wants, you would have to allow people to utilize part of their driveway in front of to include that as parking. That's what is feasible.
And that's not private property, so that could count as a public space.
I just heard
That's
the
public
engineering
land.
department's hair light on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I know with businesses, you can pay money for, you pay Sydney 20 grand or something for an off-street parking, street parking spot.
That's paying in lieu for providing, it doesn't give you a parking space on the boulevard. It just pays in lieu for providing the site. You can only do that for, I think, 10%.
Yeah.
It's pretty limited. That money goes towards building more public somewhere else. It doesn't reserve that business spot.
I think in one respect,
In the downtown.
and the chair may not agree with but Sydney is a bit lucky right now that we have one space per unit requirement.
Yeah.
And we're almost avoiding that discussion where if we had 2 spaces per unit,
It used to be two.
yeah, but this would be a much different discussion about fitting all the stuff on the bottom.
Yeah.
2 per unit, and
Oh,
we
yeah.
might be looking at a parking bylaw update concurrently.
Yeah.
And that would be
Okay.
bollocks.
In the name of time, I am at a later date. I'll just make a presentation to council or something. On the CSA.
Yeah, and Alice and I are going to
Yeah, which you're asking about price. Stop it.
So tiny homes, if it's on wheels and it moves around, it's considered a recreational vehicle or a mobile structure. And the zoning bylaw speaks to those in section 4.
Not according to the CSA and building code now. Been changes.
Okay, we'll look at that. And if it's on a foundation, then it's a dwelling unit and it comes under.
Yeah, recreational vehicles and tiny homes are out.
Okay, so we'll take a look at that and see if it's something.
You can pass them around if you like.
they're all the same.
Yeah, they're all the same. I just went in to ask, and they are.
So just while he's doing that, for everyone's knowledge, the current zoning bylaw and the draft zoning bylaw would consider this to be essentially an RV. And is it limited to 6 weeks per calendar year? 4 weeks per calendar year to be used for residential purposes. So in order to be considered sort of a dwelling for the purposes of the bylaw, something like this would need to be taken off its trailer basically and put on a permanent foundation and approved under either building code or a combination of CSA approval.
Yeah,
This is a unit for sale.
That's RV to RV houses for sale, and it does say in the manual here they're designed to meet or exceed BC building code and CSA standards. So this is actually something that's kind of coming down the line. It's new. Previously they were not governed at all. CSA was going to create entirely classification for them. Said the full 2025 and to CSA regulations for.
I think one thing that's important to remember, these are servicing, like that they'd have to be connected to water, sewer,
Same
storm
as a manufactured
connections.
home. So
And you think, how is that done? It's still on wheels. Like, you install those. So it's something that we'll look.
It would be the same as it's basically just a small version of what you have in summer as far as building CSA goes. How they. So it is something that is coming down the line. So they're changing some of the BC Housing did a very big study on it. I actually sent that to Bryce. That's 180 page study for BC Housing. But
All our time.
But that's something that can probably be done in. So,
Thanks for providing that.
I mean,
So
we take this off and put it on the foundation.
Yeah, and then
There's
it would be a
also-
dwelling unit.
there's also
It's all
garden
about-
suites that are designed to drop.
Yeah, like prefab
Prefab.
construction or modular construction.
Yeah,
that's what
modular
they're-
construction thing. And actually in Europe now they're building modular suite type things. In backyard, they're for your aging parents and whatnot. And it's essentially a care suite. So it's got built-in track systems if they need like be able to have a device to lift them out of bed. They can, like all along the track to the bathroom, the kitchen and all that. So I just mentioned it more to plant a seed, zoning amendments can be made with more information. So. From
Oh, that's a typo. Yeah, it should be maximum height. 5'3".
really. It's, something. You see in this city, there's a small competition. Maybe it's a- we don't have any single. One of the reasons why I'm living in this place has any thought been given to creating either a special zone or single occupancy in buildings, which if I were the one drafting, separated two schools and also from other schools, or giving permission to institutions these on their properties. Not been given to them.
Well, as far as the residential zones in current zoning bylaw and draft zoning bylaw, there's nothing that would preclude that kind of development. And I think what you're talking about is social housing, and social housing requires typically a government entity to come forward and say, we're building this building. And, you know, say that was a 3-story, building specifically dedicated to that kind of use. Any of like RM7, RM6, probably now it's limited to 4 units, but probably now even some of the small scale multi-unit lots might accommodate kind of. And it's really more a question of, is there anyone to propose that in Sydney? And I think if something came forward, it either fit within a zone, or if it was a zone that didn't currently allow residential use, it could certainly be a discussion that could be an application to council.
But currently it's essentially only
Oh,
and also
each, like even in a single room occupancy building, that single room is a separate.
They're all different
Under the code.
dwellings.
Yeah, so it's just like an apartment. And I think it's sort of like zoning residential properties. Right? It's a very specific use, and I think in the case of like a single room occupancy use, it's not really any different than residential use, so there's not a need to do that. But also when you're zoning something to a specific use, it's usually because you have a willing property that wants that use. And applying that randomly to, I think there might be a good one here, and what's there right now is 3 single-family homes. That usually upsets people, and we try not to upset people too much with zoning like that, because we go into get some second thoughts on that idea. But yeah, I mean, right now there's nothing in the residential zone to prevent. I don't.
We have units like that subsidized, like Big Foot Center, some other places. You my knowledge have like Zora the bottle lady. She lives. She's only, you're only allowed to make it up to a certain amount.
Right.
And typically for that type of stuff to work well, instead of putting it all when you put everybody together, or tend to drag each other down. So like the models that we use, like in Selkirk Waterfront, is your subsidized housing, affordable housing, and all that is intermixed with your middle class, your upper middle class, your penthouses. Because when you've got just 1 unit subsidized housing, maybe 1 unit of affordable housing, and the rest of the community tends to help bring them up.
So that's actually the BC Housing Community Model, project funded by BC Housing. They'll require a certain level of shelter it's called shelter something housing.
Yeah.
So basically, maybe on social assistance or something, no portion of the building will have that level of dwelling unit all the way up to market rentals, where people are paying $2,000 a month studio in a nice building. All of that's possible. What's missing is the proponent.
And then, and I noticed from there was a lot of discussion from the gallery. Making the making other pieces of the things that we have.
That was discussed at some amount during the OCP review process. Then, if you recall, during the OCP drafting, there were some neighborhood commercial policy areas that were proposed in different sections around the community. Those were removed from the draft in the OCP during the review process. There's still policies in the OCP about neighborhood commercial development, and that's supported in certain areas. Well, it doesn't designate any specific geographical areas in Sydney, but there's policies that support neighborhood commercial growth and have that happening. Somebody would need to go through a zoning amendment to the NC1 or NC2 zone to incorporate that into their property. And an OCP amendment, but there is policy support in the OCP, and there's policy language to get more neighborhood commercial happening. But it wasn't part of this process to add those neighborhood commercial uses to the neighborhood residential zones like R1, R2, or the small lot zones, because there's no policy support in the OCP for doing that, really, to pre-zone for that.
I think it came up during that OCP process as, we sort of recognized that, hey, there might be a need for additional commercial use to be part of the neighborhoods. Maybe this is other cities. So to go back and sort of like in that discussion, this whole OCP discussion rather than
And so, about we kind of did what we together. Did we want to go around the table again? I don't know.
Eric, can I just for a pause for a second, just look at the clock, so you got 1 hour and 10 minutes. One thing for the group to consider is just being sure that if APC has any consensus around recommendations, perhaps when you go around again.
I just wanted to make a note about the time too. I mean, normally APC, there's no time limit on an APC meeting, but today Corey and I have to get to the American Spears Center for the open house this evening. So we need to give ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's the reason.
So I'm hoping that this second taking on that, and then hoping that we can fall into
If I could just ask a question, I was under the impression that we were going to kind of go through the draft zoning bylaw section by section and ask for any major comments on each of the sections. So I haven't actually made any major comments on any of the sections, thinking that process was still to come. So are we doing that or not? In which case I'll leap in with my
Depends what the committee wants to
Yeah.
do, what the members want to do.
I mean, there's a lot of sections there that, okay, I have a bunch of little typographical things that I can send to Corey separately, but certainly in the major sections of the, like section 5 is probably the big one and has probably been the most in the discussion here. But I would like to address certain things there just to hear staff input and hear how other people see.
And section 4 is not really controversial because the uses in section 4
Yeah.
need to be the same as what the OCP is already.
Yeah. that's right.
So it really is section 5 where the book gets the.
Where, yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yeah, we can go through that. I mean, first of all, if there's anyone on APC, I mean, this is- They're doing it.
And just to echo Randy's comments, I'm happy if you want to send me typos or
Yeah.
little errors or things like that. We don't need to discuss it here and take a look. Fix it.
Actually, in section 4, there was one thing that I wanted to raise because I just wanted to understand what actually is going on there. It's 422C, which is about high traffic home occupations. And it's a little bit of a question with relation to also probably the Bill 44 requirements.
So these are the conditional use regulations for home occupations in the neighborhood residential zone.
That's right.
So we're talking about like R1,
Yes.
R2.
Yeah, exactly right. Allison. And I noticed that in those high traffic occupations, there are 5 things that are allowed, and it says that they are limited to 1 per dwelling unit. So because it's the words dwelling unit, that's a defined term. So if I have 4 dwelling units on my property, I could theoretically have 4 daycares operating on that property. And I have concerns with that. So I wonder if we might want to have some specific clause under high traffic occupations, such as in item 5, that would say that it would be limited to 1 daycare per property, per dwelling unit. And I'm not sure exactly how you do that, but I'm a little bit concerned about what might happen.
So we talked about this. We talked about the high traffic home occupations, and I've just pulled up the marked up version of the zoning bylaw that shows the changes from current to proposed. And we talked about, should we be limiting high traffic on these to say, oh, only 1 per property?
Right.
But then it starts to become unfair to the people in the other households. If they didn't get their application in first, then they're out of luck. Like,
Right.
it doesn't seem to be fair. And then there's also a requirement for another parking space on the property. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cory, but I think if there's a high traffic home occupation being one that receives customers to the house, they have to have another place to park on the property. So if you've already got 4 dwelling units and 4 parking spaces, that might be a limiting factor to prevent that from happening, because I don't see there be 8 extra spaces on the property.
And believe it or not, we have had a situation in town where 2 daycares
No,
were applied for.
really.
And the zoning bylaw was actually changed to accommodate,
Oh, really?
and it turned out just fine.
Yeah, there was no concerns from the, we
For-
didn't get
I'm not sure
complaints
when-
from the neighbors.
Yeah, well, no, I just read it and I thought, this folks, like, it's one thing if you're considered high traffic because you have a number of clients coming to visit you dwelling unit. But if out of your dwelling unit, you're operating a daycare, then I start to have some questions about whether you would want more than one of those on what used to be.
Yeah, and the change that was for daycares, the change that came into the bylaw was that you could have employees come to,
Right.
Yeah.
which is not a permitted thing for any
For
other
any
high
of the
traffic.
others, yeah.
But only for
Okay.
daycare.
And what that extra employee allows is the ratio to go up, so you have. So maybe that's the thing that needs to change back, is that on,
That you only want
Per-
lower end daycares without additional incentives if you can.
Right.
kinds of-
So
think it-
Quadra daycare sounds like that makes me want to buy that in the corner. Pleasant.
I'm sorry, I
Calvin.
alluded you to this.
Well, Pleasant Calvin, you could subdivide it in 3 lots. You could put daycares on each lot. You could call it daycare.
Someone
So-
comes up with a business model for that, I'm sure parents. So,
Trinity,
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
wrong, what's wrong with?
Yeah.
in the interest of time,
Yeah.
is you, to clarify, is your concern specific?
It was specifically regarding daycares, like multiple.
So maybe that's just something we'll take a look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see if any tools.
Yeah.
but again, like there needs to be an additional parking space per property, per high traffic occupation. So
Yeah.
if it's a 4-unit building, on
Yeah,
a property, then there, if
That's
two of them
not-
wanted to have high traffic, there needs to be 2 additional parking spaces.
Yeah.
So 6 parking spaces independently accessed on the property that don't block each other.
that's a
So that could
limiting.
be, that's a limiting factor.
Does it
Okay.
also need to be for daycares an additional parking spot? The additional, right?
I'd have to check the bylaw.
I don't,
But the other thing I think that found this with the previous daycare, it's actually an owner who wants to expand the business.
Yeah.
Where they set it, you know, in this case, they rented the adjacent dwelling.
right,
I would be surprised to see someone running a daycare and someone moved next door and sort of started daycare in a situation
Yeah.
like that. I've never seen it.
no, I
But-
just wondered,
It's more like
It
the
hit
person
me
says,
and I
"Oh, I'll just
thought,
rent the
oh.
office, expand it." And yeah, that might be unfair.
Yep.
The other two dwelling occupants. It's a good one.
I wanted to make just a general comment about RM7, West Side. And this kind of falls under the establishment of the zones. Actually, it falls really more under the map. Previous at APC, when we've looked at things on the west side, specifically the residential and so on, and it's come up a number of times over the last 6 years, is the question that, do you really want to have residential bordering the highway? And for me, this is a big question still. I just think having that zoning running right along the highway, that's not where you want the residential. For me, that's where you want the industrial along the highway. And I'd rather have the residential further in along Gallery Road, which is much more pleasant. So I wanted to raise that because I just wanted on record. I think it's a valid comment that's come up with other people as well.
So to respond to that, like the zoning designations on the draft zoning map, where it shows that purple shape coming along Beacon West and going up the highway, that's responding to the OCP designations that were decided by in 2022, following the West Side LA process in 2018.
Yeah.
So if you look at the map on the wall on the left there, it shows that orange kind of going up the highway. So that's why it's proposed at those locations to do that kind of L of higher density development, 4 to 6 stories. And then the mixed use light industrial, limited commercial being that mixed use village in the middle, 3 to 5 stories.
Yeah.
So it's about the scale of the development. But I understand your point.
Okay. So I just wanted to put
An
that.
important point too is that say we ignored.
Yeah, no,
Small scale multi-housing, right? Like those lots will eventually be.
The same on the east side of the highway. There's lots of residential properties adjacent to the highway
Yeah.
everywhere else in Sydney.
Let's talk about removing.
yeah, that'd be good, wouldn't
Then my shop property could be back in one. Instead of being shut down.
it? The other thing I wanted to talk about, sort of in general terms, and I've heard what you've said about creating this block of land within the various setbacks and then letting people do whatever they want within that block. And that sounds like a really great idea. And overall, I've also noticed that in setting up the various charts for the densities and setbacks of the different zones, that you guys, you've done a great job at trying to increase setbacks, decrease densities in certain areas, especially in residential. But there's a couple of things from the OCP that I haven't quite seen carry across. So those are the items I wanted to raise. And one of them that I'm looking at is in 5.2.3, which is neighborhood residential zones, page 58. That has, from all those different residential zones that have been kind of shrunk down into just the one set of requirements. I'm wondering if there's other things in there, and this is where you're going to tell me the box is actually the best idea. things like a certain amount of green space. So there's at least one tree proposed on some of those multi-residential lots. I'd like to see like a tree on every lot in Sydney. And one of my fears is that as all of these, if these lots start to densify, we're going to lose more and more trees. So I was wondering about whether there could be some expansion about that tree regulation into also these neighborhood residential areas, possibly.
And then sort of that landscape design section that has the requirement.
Yeah, the one tree.
That applies.
Oh, it does.
So it's not just on residential.
Okay.
It says in multi-unit residential.
Oh, does it?
zones. So.
Yeah.
It does say that. So that, I mean, that's common.
Yeah. Yeah.
So expanding that to.
And yeah, and also I really like that in the residential zone that there's a certain size of building you have there, and you might have your second story. And when you go to your third story, that's only going to have 70% of the area of the story below it. And that's great in the residential area. I'm wondering whether some comment like that could also be applied to commercial and multi-unit residential, especially where in the OCP where we talked about commercial or multi-purpose buildings next to less dense developments. I know you've increased the setback, but if through the upper stories we can see some way of decreasing area of upper stories to allow more sunlight into all areas of city. I'd like to see maybe some expansion of language in that.
So there is that does happen theoretically, not through a specific regulation, but the FAR number in each of the zones that has
Yeah.
FAR allows a certain amount of floor area in that building. I don't think, unless in some cases where the lot is very small, sometimes the FAR number fills up the entire building envelope, but in most cases it doesn't.
Right.
And so at some point in the building, there needs to be a step back.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens at the first floor level. Sometimes that happens at the upper story
Yeah.
levels. Like, for example, in the Beacon on Beacon with
Yeah.
the Starbucks in it, as that tiers up, that,
Yeah.
that building has an FAR that doesn't allow those upper stories to come out much further than that anyway, because of the way the
Yeah.
FAR works. So it's an indirect limitation on those upper story setbacks.
Yeah.
We've stopped short on specific, like at the fourth story.
Yeah.
Fourth story shall be set back by 10
So
meters from the rear
yeah,
property line.
But I wondered if a percentage might help. Like, for example, that building on the corner of 4th and Beacon, that works really. The Cameo building also worked really well. But the Oceana building did not work out so well that way.
One of the pressures we always get with bigger buildings like that is there's a very strong desire to.
Yes,
where
yes, I know.
Because pipes need to line up.
Yeah,
and
I know.
vents
Bathrooms
line
need to
up,
line up.
all that
Yeah.
stuff needs to line up. So I would just really like to.
Yeah.
see a floor
Seismically, it
plan
needs
that's
to-
com-
engineer's requirement.
As soon as you require a setback.
Yeah.
Floor plan changes and then sort of.
Yeah.
Well, I think the FAR was sort of a proxy, combined with the design guidelines that talk about upper story setbacks. And provide some council discretion and,
Right.
APC comment. So we haven't gone there.
Okay.
That's why.
And yeah, the areas that you mentioned, the multi-unit, multifamily residential, commercial, those are subject to development permits for the look of the building that are reviewed by against the design guidelines. So these neighborhood residential areas, most of them will be subject to development permits for the look of the building again.
No.
So having that limit brings a little bit of design control into
Right,
place.
right.
It has to be somewhat scaled back. If it's gonna be 3 stories, the third floor has to be pulled back a bit. And there's a lot of variation in how somebody can do that, but it does put a little bit of shape.
If I can go on. 5.3 multi-unit residential zones. So one of the great things is that, like I was saying, minimum lot areas have gone up. All kinds of things. You guys have made all those kinds of adjustments. Some of the FAR densities are a little bit of a mystery, I guess, to me. So I went back and I had a look. For example, I'm looking at RM7, townhouse dwellings, and I'm seeing like a density of 1.3 to a bonus density of 2. And I went back and I looked at that 3-part development on Rest Haven to see what kind of density that was at. So that site that I consider totally full, like, I mean, that thing is packed. They got everything in there they could. The FAR for that was 1.1. So now we're looking at townhouses at 1.3 to 2.
That's not a change from the current zoning.
No,
bylaw.
I know, it
It
isn't.
depends on the lot area. Smaller properties, you're not going to be able to achieve into the bonus density. Larger properties, you could, because of the height setbacks and lot coverage. Those control the kind of the massing, which is the bulk control, like how far it's going to be back from
Yeah.
So you're not always going to be building into that bonus density.
No, and sometimes you're not even.
This is true.
Yeah, and a third one added on afterwards. Yeah, yeah. But I'm just sort of alerting everybody that's 1.1. And that was one of the sites where we were saying, wow, that's totally filled. We don't want so much density. So things like lot areas and setbacks have been adjusted, but the FARs are still there. So I'm kind of wondering how it's all going to work out in the wash in the future with actual developments.
So even on that site, the right in the zoning bylaw is there to go up to 2.0
Yeah.
FAR. Of course, there's an amenity charge that comes along with that.
Right.
I think I might think about it this way, and going back to the missing middle idea. If ground-oriented townhouse style development, aka the so-called missing middle stuff, was something that you wanted to encourage in a community as a desired housing form, would you penalize it with a bonus density payment requirement? And if the bulk of your development in multi-unit residential zones is already apartment, and most developers are scrambling to do apartment, that might be the use that you say, okay, well, if you want to do this, there's an amenity charge that comes along with this based on that building typology.
Right.
So in essence, I think it's a bit of a way to encourage the more ground-oriented townhouse style stuff without that amenity charge, because we don't get that. Those are some of the more. We had a big spate of townhouse construction in the 90s, I think,
Right.
and not much since then. And then what's only recently we've had some of that stuff happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. And by lowering the density number for townhouses specifically, we would be, in essence, kind of pushing back against the new construction of that type of building, because they would then be subject to more of an amenity payment and at a disadvantage comparatively to the apartment stuff.
And I guess you could possibly anticipate that townhousing, or you might have one unit. That would be the only way that it would maybe be achieved.
But those simple, like, doors on the street townhouse units, like that,
Yeah.
I think the idea from, when all this FAR stuff came into place was that that stuff would or not penalized from a bonus density perspective.
Right.
But you're not getting the open space.
No.
Criteria.
Well, that's what's
that you-
behind the setback and coverage adjustments.
Yeah.
So you
To get
still have
some open space.
that FAR range, but
Right.
now you have
Small box,
smaller
put it,
lots.
The-
Hmm.
You have any more? Because what I'm thinking is that we are running into time limitations. I also recognize that we're considering hours to do a leg stretch, and then maybe we can
Absolutely.
quickly after the leg stretch, we'll just
Yeah.
finish going around the second time and then move right into a record of decision. We do need to come up for the end.
We typically do the record of decision after making, after APC votes on a recommendation. So it's a summary of the discussion that has happened.
So, we just take a quick 2-minute stretch coming back at 3:16.
tell us where
Yeah.
we lose these rental units in the community.
Then,
What do we do?
Yeah.
So it's that conversation. Parameters of that.
Yeah, which makes total sense. Like,
Couldn't you keep that same thing? Policy or bylaw that says that if redevelopment rental facility requires the housing plan?
So the province, like, weeks ago, just brought in this new legislation that basically says now you can do a bylaw that requires, it's called a tenant protection bylaw. So that's like a very recent development, and this has been in development for 6 months at least.
Yeah, I don't even think it was weeks ago. It's just.
I thought you could do that before though.
So we have a policy, but the policy only applies in a rezoning scenario. Otherwise, it's just a suggestion. And so through a rezoning process to redevelop our property at a higher density, then council can start to ask these questions. So I guess there's a question here, like, is this necessary given that the province has given us these new powers? But that's only to protect the tenants who are in the building. There's still the question of what happens to those rental units that are,
yeah,
you're going to redevelop with condos.
Yeah.
We're losing that rental stock.
and if they've already gotten all the tenants out of the building.
Yeah, I mean, there's pretty restrictive ways. The Residential Tenancy Act only allows you to evict a tenant if you have, in good faith, obtained all the necessary permits, et cetera, to demolish the homes. So,
Yeah, let's get back. Bernadine, did you have any other?
I just had one or two
Last
other
one.
questions, yeah.
Okay.
Over in gallery, I was reading the sections regarding M2 and M3 about the densities being calculated based on the lot area prior to dedication for a new roadway widths and that kind of thing. And I was kind of wondering about that because the lot area is a defined term. Once the lot area changes into a different lot area, can you actually do that way? Like, can that work legally, or should you just have perhaps higher densities to cover the size that these lots are going to be reduced by? And I'm just sort of, I read that and I thought, ooh, can you actually do this in this manner?
I think so, as long as the zoning bylaw says that there's it's built into the parameters of the zone. I mean, that wording creates a level of uncertainty given you might have different lot sizes, and on it's a 1,000 square meter lot with 2 meter frontage dedication. Depending on the shape of the lot, you might have a different percentage of that lot being given up compared to another lot that's maybe 2,000 square meters and has a different shape. Yeah, but I think generally it works out. The frontage is not a huge amount, the frontage dedication.
Right.
So in the scheme of things, I don't think it's a huge change to the density or really difficult sort of process thing to wrap your mind around for information.
And my last question was just regarding the addition of putting one tree on sites. I was also wondering on that requirement, whether it's possible to base that on the size of the property. So if your property is a certain area, then you're required to have one tree zone like that. If it's a much larger property, then 2 trees might be required. Just throwing it out there.
Saying like to increase that minimum space for a tree, if it's a larger property, to have 2, that you're.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, Bernadine, but
Yeah, I know.
I think this is one of the things like Victoria and the single stuff that it's step toward making it too difficult to make anything work.
Yeah.
And I think we were somewhat comfortable. We still think there's going to be challenges, big
With the
challenges,
tree.
particularly where people want to do underground parking. Now you have to cut out a chunk of the underground parking
Yeah.
to have root soil.
True.
There's going to be
True.
major pushback against that.
Well, that have no structures above or below, it's challenging when you have a large site with a limited frontage, say like the development of Oslo rental apartment building up there, just something amount of 3-story, 71 units, a small frontage.
Yeah.
And not only its own servicing coming through, but also an easement for servicing the Roberts Manor building behind it too. But all these underground pipes.
Yeah.
Plus you have to have a pedestrian entrance, and then a ramp entrance, and then all the things that have to fit in this little strip. There was barely any space in that frontage to plant a tree, because when you think of everything that's underground, there's just no space. So,
But they were still able to protect that.
yeah, they were
Huge
able to
tree up
protect
front.
the existing protected tree. So
But-
it's just, yeah,
Yeah,
trying to
think-
fit it all in.
I think we looked at this and we thought, you know, one we could do.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and maybe
We'll try.
not get that much pushback.
Yes.
Do two.
Is it I didn't read that part. Is it a set size or is it a percentage of property?
It's an
It's
area.
an area with a 1 minute each.
What would you say?
It's in section 6, like the end of section 6. of the
Okay.
zoning.
Does it say what kind of tree?
No.
On those properties, there's gonna be a landscape plan, which is part of their
Yeah.
development. permit, which is-
And can I just make the comment that the planning department doesn't, it's not that we don't care about trees.
No, I know.
We're trying to
try so
balance
hard for
so
trees.
many things,
There's
right?
so many
And all we're
things.
trying to do is make all this stuff work together. Not just compete with us and our trees. Water.
Yep.
So.
Just asking the
we're seeking
question.
balance.
No, but big question.
Good question.
This is the tail end of our second time around the table. Anyone?
Well, I just have a couple of questions about the West Area plan. Plan specifically for 2-story buildings there.
No, there's a land use section in the plan, just identifies with the maximum stories. So for that Galway neighborhood, that RM7 west side strip that goes around the outside on the south and east sides, maximum is 6. So that's why there's that up to 6 stories with affordable housing in there. And for the mixed use village section in the center is
Oh, why would you, under the
And 7.
RM7 west side, why would it not be same sort of format as the general residential where it would be up to 3 story? Why did you limit to?
Oh, the M2 zone,
Yeah,
like
the
the
M2.
one for the mixed use village in
Yeah.
the middle.
So this is, there's a policy that area says rezonings will proceed from the outside. So starting at Galaran, starting at Inner Avenue West, starting at Beacon Avenue West. The RM7 West Side zone is on the periphery, Beacon Avenue West. It's on the highway. The policy doesn't say on the highway, but I think the reason that policy has been somewhat changed because of the small scale housing thing, where those properties now have to change, and we can't keep them as single and 2-family properties. The province won't allow that in. And so I think staff have proposed this RM7 West Side zone going looping around sort of on the outside periphery. And instead of the existing R2 zoning where the mixed use village, the central portion is, which if left alone would to be small scale multi-unit housing, we've proposed this 2-story M2 zone with the idea that you could go to that maximum 5 stories, but that requires, as that policy in the CP says, rezoning. So that's the reason why it's structured that.
But you don't think that it would be better to have it set up so that it would, you have it equal to the R zoning, 3 story, and then with rezoning going up to 5 stories. And having more housing, 2 stories of, or at minimum 1 story of housing, 1 story of like, you know, of industrial, commercial office, and then, you know, commercial manufacturing.
I think the idea with that mixed use village was that there would be, because it is, you know, anything above sort of 2 stories in that area is going to change for sure. And so I think there was a desire that as that change happens, council would have the ability through the rezoning process to try and mitigate maybe some of the impacts that it might bring to neighborhoods. So, you know, you could definitely look at things like, well, okay, it's not, maybe there's a project, an application that comes in, it's not quite on Gallery, and maybe it's off Gallery a little bit. Well, you know, it's on the periphery, so maybe that's okay. But let's look at some mitigations for, if, you know, it's a 4-story building next to a 1 or 2 story rancher or something like that. You know, there's a little more council discretion there and an ability to influence how they're developed.
Actually, I'm concerned about that whole Gallery area. Just because I think people there are not going to be really thrilled about the M2, and I'm not sure they really knew that was coming. On the one hand, when I look at the whole plan and I look at the West Side local area plan, I think, wow, this looks great. But I'm not living in that neighborhood in what is still currently an R2 zoning. And I really feel like there's only been one proposal that's come forward in that area, and it didn't go forward. And that's been, how long has it been?
That was before the OCP music. That was years before we started the OCP.
Wasn't that in the last?
No,
It was
there
in the last 3 or 4
years. The 3-story 12. That was the only one that we're thinking of offering the same one.
Yeah.
It was 2019.
So it's 5 years.
Yeah,
They're
it was
really
before the OCP.
Yeah.
So if I recall, council denied that application and made some comments at the council meeting that it was almost premature, even though the West Side LAP had been adopted as a schedule to the OCP. That development met the West Side LAP to a T, but there had been no development permit area guidelines developed. There was no zones. There was no, things hadn't been developed in more detail in the West Side LAP. And they felt it was in the middle of the neighborhood. So there was some concern about that. But in terms of.
But so that's all been done now.
All that's been done.
Design guidelines.
That neighborhood, I mean, the OCP consultation, we did as much public engagement as we could. So even for the zoning bylaw review, a letter was sent to every property owner in Sydney, every resident, like what, 9,000 letters or something went out to tell everybody there's a zoning bylaw change. It affects every property in Sydney. Please come find out about it. So we're trying to reach everybody that.
During the OCP process, every resident received a letter.
They did.
Saying
a specific letter went out to those residents.
So, but that was 3 or 4 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
So since then, people haven't heard anything up until now, when it's happened.
Well, it wasn't 3 or 4 years ago. It was as recently as
2022. It's 2 years ago.
It just feels like 3 or 4 years ago. I've been in that many meetings. Yeah. I guess my suggestion was just going to be, if this has to go to an M2 zone, that could you not, for this neighborhood, take those same requirements that you have under Bill 44 and put those into the zoning for anyone that owns a single or 2-family.
So I think that goes back to the question of every investment that happens.
I know. And I know.
Contrary to the OCP, takes us further away from that transition. And, you know, I think I've heard some people express concern about the M2 zone being not a great fit. That neighborhood is going to change regardless. The province has made it clear that that neighborhood in its present form is gone. Single and 2 family is no longer permitted as the only use in a zone. And, you know, I guess from a planner's perspective, what's the difference in scale of use between a small 2-story mixed-use building and a 4-plex?
3-story 4-plex.
A 3-story 4-plex. You know, the number of people coming and going might be greater in the 4-plex. And, I think through the design guideline process and sensitively done, I think it's possible to do a gentle transition. It's going to be council oversight. So those are the staff are working with those policies in the UCP and the lab, and doing our best to, I think, deliver the most sensitive land use change there that we possibly can with this structure that's been set up through the Westland, through the OCP amending process to incorporate those design guidelines through the very small scale M2 zone that doesn't allow that 5-story scale yet. And if there is something up to that scale of 5 stories, council approval is needed. So it's I think a fairly graduated approach. Anyway, that's staff's perspective and rationale for why this is like it is. Yeah.
I understand.
That is our second round. Do we have any consensus around recommendations?
I like all my ideas.
If you thought, Alex's comments and Christina's comments, and I think the vast majority of Brendan's comments. And we want to see about the west side local area plan and that relates to the zoning bylaw, because that seems to be the most contentious area.
I personally would be hesitant to make any suggestions on this because it sounds like city staff put a lot of thought and hours into this, and for us making changes after a 2-hour meeting, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate.
Can I just quickly respond to just one comment that's made in his comments? Talking about the Gallery neighborhood, you said there's still options for the area. R2 under Bill 44, that is an option. Division of the West Side local area and 3 something else. So number 3 something else is not possible without an OCP amendment. And that would be a much more substantial process than anything we're looking at here. So I just wanted to make that clear that something like R2, the small scale multi-unit housing, is an option because basically the province gives us the option to ignore the OCP under that and go with that alternative. Just do 4 units on a property. But staff, our guidance is the OCP, is the policy in the West Side. So we follow that guidance, but understanding that there is no easy discussion for this neighborhood. It's land use change is always a bit tough. So.
And on that, Lucina also talks about that, making that an R2 zone. Would be a easy. Advocating for Lucina, but I'm just saying that.
If I could make a comment as well. So I think the small scale multi-unit housing being an option there would set up increasing number of barriers to a mixed use village. Purely residential development, once in place, is very difficult to, even as we're seeing right now with the Gallery neighborhood as a single and 2-family neighborhood, adding more intense residential uses to that neighborhood, your small scale multi housing, I think there's going to be even more pushback to a mixed use village there. Yeah. And it's going to, I think, move further away from that policy approach that's been developed for so many years.
If I could add to that too, if the driver behind that thought, why not go to Bill 44 and create more housing that we need, is if that's the goal, then all of BC is now allowed to be 4 units per property, where it's single and 2 family. All the rest of Sydney that's single and 2 family units now has that permission. This neighborhood was identified back in 2018 through that West LP process as having a different and additional potential, which has a much bigger potential for creating more housing as part of that mixed use village. So whether you're limiting it to 4 units per property or allowing it to develop through those OCP policies for more uses and a higher residence. There's different goals that could be achieved here in that neighborhood, rather than treating it like the rest of the neighborhoods.
I agree with Alex in that we shouldn't overthink this, overthink staff expertise, and that an awful lot of work has been gone into the West Side area plan, and that it needs to be implemented, and that there's already implementation plans sort of working from the outside in, and now there's development guidelines and things like that. So I think that there's a well thought out method of redeveloping that neighborhood for the next 50 years, rather something that will embed with similar type of housing that's already.
If somebody makes a land amalgamation in that West Sydney area, can they also apply for like a comprehensive development zone to rezone if they've got a good idea for something if it's slightly outside boxes?
I mean, I think the MPP zone is pretty flexible. There's always, I guess, uses that thought of at the time.
Well, I mean, if they did want to say build a large condo complex type thing that had some units on the ground floor for accessibility, like would there be able to be?
I mean, I guess, yeah, that might be a variance process, it might be a CV zone.
Yeah.
I mean, people come forward all the time with ideas that don't fit exactly into the zoning bylaw, and
But like it has before, things are possible.
yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at the Cedarwood, it's 2 CV zones, right?
Yeah. It was something. Okay. There's an example.
Which exists in the some property. There's 4 freestanding. Yeah, we have.
We've answered it.
So is our recommendation going to be that the zoning bylaw proceeds without any additions from?
I think the fuel storage is something that needs to be amended with regards to propane.
So we may want to see that captured in this amount of stuff.
There, just quickly recap that conversation about mixed use village on the Galler, and I just completely agree with Allison that it's in the future will allow for more housing, and I think it's just a better idea than our R1, R2, and I really like the M2 and M3 idea because that, in my opinion, it's kind of like a self-control. If somebody applies to rezone to M3, then there's a certain process that is happening, and I'd like to compliment Talon on that.
On the Cinder's comments about them. Get a color palette with a little more contrast to be introduced. Some of the zones, the colors are pretty close, so it kind of looks like you've got one of those paint swatches from the paint store where you have 3 different blues, and when they're on the paint swatch, you can tell the difference, but if one's on a wall, you couldn't tell which one it was until you go up to it.
So what, sorry, there's a, I don't know, Todd, if you're aware, there's a GIS map, there's an interactive map that you can search by address, click on that lot.
I did not find that.
So we're working right now on making, that doesn't include the proposed zoning.
Well,
So, but we're working-
obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just used the BC assessment website.
No, there's like, I mean, each municipality, I shouldn't say each, but not every municipality, but most municipalities, they have those GIS maps, Sydney including.
Yeah.
And it's, it's the map where you can search by address, gets the zoning, utility on whatever, the services information.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can share the link, I think.
Actually, I guess I
Yeah,
have
we can
used some of
email
those
links,
maps because
email
there is a bunch of different levels, see just services.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have used some of them.
Yeah, the proposed zoning isn't on our GIS map because it's not.
Because it's not adopted.
Well, it will be.
It would be, yeah,
Yeah.
when the bylaws.
Once
adopted, then
yeah,
it'll
correct.
be on.
When it is adopted, but it's just a little more.
So far for the recommendation, someone is APC recommends. To be permitted. Yes. Yes. Have anyone else to say?
I actually would like to see captured information around N2 and N3. Certainly there's, a lot of people in the room that are in support of what the staff have recommended. But also there are, when you look at Lucina's comments and some of the things that I've been asking about, others who feel that perhaps some option for people to still have access to similar residential zoning to what others would have in R1 or R2 area would be nice to be included. So
how would that be?
So what that,
APC.
would this be more something for a record of decision?
Oh,
Kind of
yeah.
capture the
I
flavor
guess
of it
so.
rather
I
than a
guess you're right.
recommendation of council, or
yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
more-
don't want to
more
preclude
record.
if you're making a recommendation, please go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But if you're wanting to kind of capture the flavor of the discussion for council to know what the top.
Sorry, I've lost where I was. About wording for this.
Wording for.
Yeah, but Allison has just said that's.
That
But
would
you
fall
can-
under the
yeah.
record.
If you wanted to make a recommendation to council, though, this would be the time.
Yeah,
Yeah. Don't let me hold you back from doing that.
But then-
because that's-
I won't because I think. Which is.
It's up to the commission, not to staff.
Sure. Like it the way it's.
I agree with Alex. I think there's going to be growing pains. It's just the reality. It's a transition to it. It'll just have to be addressed in this way.
Kim, did you have anything coming out of your comments on setbacks that you wanted to further pursue, or just as a comment in the record discussion?
Septic setbacks they've been adjusted. Like my point, what I guess was that modeling, and you actually build this multi-unit, single, those units, 4 units. Modeled it, so I think.
So it looks like our own.
I will move that.
Second that.
Oh,
Discussion. Seeing none. Question. Those in favor? That is our.
Yeah, I think the other things that we've discussed, if council's watching the,
that's the purpose of record of decision, we just
Yeah.
kind of like include the items that we.
yeah, I mean, I would like to see less of a front setback, but I understand that sort of birding, that would just be paying the shade that would be provided by buildings in the backyards of existing other houses and for, just for quality of life. But I'm not sure, they also have very good reasons for having it pushed back, so it's sort of a.
So we can decide. That can be. Decision. But yeah.
You wanna do
I
the
just like
record of
putting back
decision or?
Looks like you guys go off.
Well, good job, honestly.
I think,
I'll head to another.
I think Corey worked pretty hard today.
Well,
I
all
appreciate
time,
it.
it's not just me, all time staff.
I'm sure it's a huge process, and that's exactly why I said what I said. I just don't want to really do this. I did read the materials and stuff, but I only thought about maybe 2-3 hours, maybe 4, versus 400 plus. And I think that recommendation we have is one appropriate because it's obviously, I'm just changing or whatever the requirement or maybe flaw, but the rest in terms of setbacks, I'm sure you tested a lot of things.
Yeah, and, I think internally staff went back and forth between 2-meter front setback, smaller back, rear setback, all sorts of permutations, and this is where we.
What other concern that I just need to raise on the other decision is that when we were working on the OCP, there were a lot of different opportunities for people to give feedback throughout the project. And my one concern with the zoning bylaw update is that because there's been a staff shortage in the town and because of the legislation coming, there haven't been those multiple entries for people to give feedback along the way. And now we're sitting at this point where there's just one week of open houses from 9 to 12 in council chambers and only one session tonight over at Marion Spear. And that I can remember, Corey, when you were working on OCP, a lot of some of the discussion there was, oh, well, when we get to the zoning bylaw, that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And that's when people can actually see the setbacks and see, how they're affected and so on. And people will be able to give input. And I kind of feel like that's really so compressed that it worries me.
So if you look at the first staff report that I wrote to council for a year ago, the intent was to go through each section of the bylaw and go to council with sort of that section on commercial or residential. And, here's the approach, get some feedback, for commercial, maybe not a lot to discuss there. So maybe it's not necessary to go to community extensively and do that. But I think partially the issue is that the province took so long to come out with this stuff and so much hinges on it that whole process that we had planned on just sort of blown out of the water. And we tried to do it a little bit with Summergate Village. and one or two other things that we included in staff reports along the way, but there just wasn't, I mean, it's not an idea.
But that also sort of begs the question for me, about why doesn't the town just adopt the Bill 44 requirements that they have to do by the end of June and give a little more time for zoning bylaw feedback?
So I'll just interject and say, we may be drifting, but on that
Yep.
point, that could be a recommendation. Right, I mean, there's nothing, I mean, if you want to move that suggestion, I think the reality is I'll let staff comment on it.
Yeah, there's so much
From the list of things to do
Yeah.
that remains to be done on the timelines that have been set out. And the level of engagement historically in July and August have not necessarily helped the input cycle. So I mean, I hear what you're saying. I agree, and I think this was certainly raised at councils aren't very much yet. But the traction that's here, given everything else that has to happen once this is completed, I think Allison referred to this as, we were thinking that this was the finish line. Well, it's not anymore.
No.
So there's a long way to go yet, but I certainly appreciate what you're saying. I mean, bylaws are made to be amended, right? Like things can be, you could carry on section by section. So,
Well, as I mentioned, this is the start of at least a 3-year process of cyclical updates. The province has now said OCPs need to be updated every 5 years. I will say too that OCPs and zoning bylaws are not the same. And the reason I say that is because OCPs are policy direction documents, and legally zoning bylaws need to be consistent with OCPs. So there should be a level of confidence in the community that what's in the OCP is going to be delivered through the zoning bylaw. And no doubt, there's still, I think, feeling out there that West Side Local Area Plan is a difficult one, right? And it is land use change. I don't think it's going to be a perfect transition if it happens, but it is consistent. That is the OCP. It's part of the OCP. That was discussed. What's, I think, in the zoning bylaw is 100% consistent with that. And, it's I guess a matter of opinion after that, whether or not it's been implemented properly. But it is, we did consult on the West Side Local Area Plan and all that stuff. And the OCP is just the zoning bylaws, the delivery mechanism for what's consulted.
And the intent of course the OCP patients as opposed to zoning.
Well, that's part of their legislative changes in terms of no more public hearings for residential, rezonings for residential development, is to get people to participate at the OCP stage. And then when the zoning bylaw is done, as Corey just said, that's the delivery mechanism for following through on all the policies that people got in the OCP. And like you said, we did a lot of consultation on the OCP. So this is all because of the OCP are these changes, that and the provincial legislative changes. So that's why we're seeing all these zoning bylaw changes, is to deliver on those things.
Great. So do you want to
us
quick record?
So let's already go.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll see some of you tonight.
How long is this? 5 to 7.
We'll be upstairs all week in the council chambers and always like by email, by phone.
I stopped by yesterday.
Nearly the exact same
I'll
presentation.
send you
at
other
5:15. Thank you for
like
taking
things.
all the time.
Stopped by to run into Lloyd.
Oh, really?
All right.
Yeah.
So Ruth is sharing her screen to do the record of decision.
Say easy.
Even though it probably would never happen.
Or should we?
If it is stored,
Or should we just say?
I can talk to Corey about that, like APC's already made and voted on your recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
just a
changing it to the
revenue
revenue
decision,
decision
that's not gonna,
This is just
Yeah,
to
just
capture the essence of the
However,
discussion.
however it should be.
Yeah, so it's a, yes.
Press for months. Anyway, they'll figure it out.
And, the second point. is, discussion. Yeah.
into the free zone.
Versus. Other.
The R
Carol.
dollars.
Yeah, Carolyn, I can't even pronounce that anymore. Should we say something about that APC generally agrees with the recommends, whatever the case is?
If you wanted to.
We should. I'd say,
Oh, generally agrees with what this part is then too.
well, no, with the proposed zoning amendment. I'd say
Oh,
we
what
agree
were you
with.
trying to say, Alex? Were you trying to say that the presentation of the
Yeah,
zoning?
yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to-
I would say. Does it make sense? Do we?
If there's members of other points of view, the record of decision is the place where you can add comments, like one member had an opinion that X, you can use that record of decision to show
Yeah.
those different opinions.
And I
in
think
committee
that
if you want.
that should be, I'll just wait till it's finished. Down.
I'm not done.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. That's your opinion.
Don't let me word it for you.
No, no, I hear you. About, had an opinion about, or, about, removing R2 zoning. From the Gallon neighborhood.
That may have been shared with
Clarence and Lucia as well,
Well,
so
maybe
who are
it's
not here.
Some members maybe.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
some member. You might want to say more about what that opinion is.
These members felt that R2 zoning should be retained. And changes to M2 and M3 zoning should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis through rezoning. Or through zoning amendment.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh, yes, I had an opinion about reducing the front setbacks and adding that equal portion to the rear setback to position houses further forward on the lots to create bigger backyards for less shade on existing buildings. I know you.
You're not,
doing
you're
great.
not, you're not as fast as we expect you to be.
Adding portion to the, sorry, back setback, to create bigger backyards for more sunlight exposure and less risk of fire. That's discussion on fire spreading, fire prevention.
That's specifically R1, R2.
Yeah, R1, R2.
Say reducing the front setbacks in the R1 and R2 zones.
Yeah, I guess in R1.
Oh, the overpass.
What's that got to do with the zoning?
It has
It
nothing
doesn't.
to do with the
Doesn't
zone.
matter.
It would be, it would be nice to have it.
It would
That
be
would-
nice to
it's not a
have.
zoning violation.
Oh, I guess also I spoke to the tiny homes. But there's a lot of stuff still changing to do with it, so it might be something better to just bring forward at a different date when they finish amendments to the building code. That kind of thing. I talked to Scott at like already. See, so.
Is that everything for the record of decision?
And
Can you put it back on the-
then there was talk about lossing green space. Trees. We did discuss some trees.
Yeah.
What would the point be then? Like what would it be in regards to like that? Concerned about it or supported, or we give some context around that discussion?
I certainly wanted to see trees on all sites. And not just restricted to residential. Now, that was correct. See what I'm saying? Or
Yeah,
was it?
that was your point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not required, it's only required from the community.
I think industrial have.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of landscape requirements, but this new provision for a certain dimension of open space or tree, the zoning bylaw draft says it's just for multi-unit residential.
Oh, yeah.
So that was
Not just restricted to
Multi-unit residential.
that pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah.
or no, we've got to do the items discussed by council.
I think I'd just say, Alice pretty much provided when we talked about 2180, right?
Well-
And then received 3 readings.
Let's see the one too.
We not necessary.
I feel like we have not
I
met
don't
since
think
Cedarwood,
so.
because the minutes were from the Cedarwood meeting, but they're not in this agenda packet,
Oh, yeah.
so you can talk about this decision.
Well, it was quite a while ago. You probably read about the newspaper. I think as you know, that's you would, as well. Yeah. So that was through that.
Yes.
Those are the 2 large, currently. $21.80 was received 3rd reading, so we'll come back to council.
Yeah, come back for final, for them to consider giving final.
Will that come back to APC or?
No, it's already been.
What's 2180?
Sorry, that's a development at the northwest corner. Highway, so it's a big vacant lot right now. It's 5-story. Purpose-built rental. That
And that
includes.
conforms to the west side.
Yes. Yeah. but it's a rezoning. It's currently zoned a CD zone for a different.
So people live in town.
It's a vacant lot.
No, it's full of crap.
Oh.
Well, that's for the property owner to, if there's people. Property.
Can I put a function for doing that? If, sorry, don't do that.
Yeah, I am, thank you.
I'll just say that I do congratulate planning staff and Cory for the excellent process of redevelopment of the zoning. And I think that you've seen that the committee on the whole supports all of your work and a lot of expertise that's gone into it on your behalf, on your part. And so I'm very skilled people.
Thanks very much. It has definitely been a group effort for his last. Now they're planners to. Steve met Selena.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long process, so we're glad to be able to see what happens next.
Be interesting to see what the public say tonight.
I was second.
Let's go.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Mr. Eric?
I read the policy.